Some ideas don't just make you think. They change you, and you can't go back. Once you've seen yourself through a different lens, the old version of you can't survive. For the next 3 hours, we'll explore ideas powerful enough to shift your beliefs, rewrite your identity, and quietly reshape the way you move through the world. And that journey begins with the most disorienting thought of all. You might not be who you think. You have carried a picture of yourself for as long as you've been aware. Not a photograph, but an invisible image you keep somewhere behind the eyes. The sum of your personality, memories, likes, dislikes, habits, and roles. You may think of it as fixed, like a stone carving you've been slowly chiseling since childhood. But what if it isn't stone at all? What if it's smoke, always shifting, always shaped by the winds around you? Think of the last time you felt truly out of character. Maybe you surprised yourself with a sudden burst of anger, or with a kindness you didn't think you had in you. In those moments, you may have wondered, was that the real me, or just a strange exception? Most of us treat the real me as a constant, a stable center hidden beneath all our moods and masks. But when you start paying attention, the evidence for that stable self begins to thin out. Psychologists sometimes speak of the self as a narrative. It's not a single solid thing, but a story you've been telling, mostly to yourself, with selective edits and careful framing. You pick which memories to emphasize, which to let fade, and which to quietly rewrite. You cast yourself as the hero or survivor, the victim or the fighter, depending on the needs of the moment. But like all stories, the one you tell about yourself is never the whole truth, and it can change completely with a few different plot twists. Philosophers have long questioned whether the self even exists as an enduring thing. David Hume, in the 18th century, compared it to a theater, with perceptions, emotions, and thoughts constantly appearing and vanishing on stage. The stage itself, the self, might be an illusion, a convenient frame to hold the show together. And in Eastern traditions, like Buddhism, the idea of anatta teaches that clinging to a fixed self is the root of suffering, because it's like holding on to a shadow and insisting it's solid. The strange part is that you can feel this truth if you look closely. Your preferences change. Your beliefs shift. The person you were 10 years ago might embarrass you or feel like a stranger entirely. Yet we keep wrapping all those versions in a single name, pretending they are the same continuous being. It's a comforting fiction, one that makes it easier to plan for the future, to maintain relationships, to feel accountable for promises made. But deep down, there's a quiet unease in knowing that the you of tomorrow may see the world in ways you can't even imagine now. And if that's the case, what does it mean to stay true to yourself? Which self are you staying true to, the one you are now or the one you haven't met yet? Perhaps the self isn't a solid core to be defended, but a river to be navigated. The banks change, the currents shift, and the water passing through at any given moment will never pass that way again. When you think this way, life starts to look less like a journey toward a final fixed identity and more like a series of overlapping masks, each one fitting for a time before it's set aside. There's a freedom in that. If the self is not fixed, then neither are you bound to keep the same fears, limitations, or definitions you've carried until now. But there's also a cost. If the real me is always moving, then decisions you make today may ripple through versions of yourself you cannot yet predict. Choices stop being small, isolated events. They become inflection points in the ongoing experiment of your life, points where one version of you turns into another entirely. And sometimes, a choice can be so subtle, so quiet, that you don't notice the transformation until much later. But by then, the old self is gone, replaced by someone with different priorities, different dreams, and different regrets. Perhaps that's the unsettling truth. You are not one person moving through time. You are many, arriving and departing, each with their own brief reign over your name and face. And if that's true, then the next time you decide, even in a small way, you may be setting in motion an entirely different life. You may be opening the door to a self you've never met, but who will wear your skin as if it had always belonged to them. Every choice creates a new world. A door stands before you. You hesitate. Your hand moves toward the handle, then pauses. In that moment of pause, there are two versions of the world, one where you open the door and step through, and one where you walk away. Both are real in their own way until you commit to one. And once you do, the other dissolves, as if it had never existed. It's easy to think of big decisions, where to live, who to love, what work to devote yourself to, as the ones that shape life's course. But the truth is quieter and far more unsettling. Every choice, even the smallest, rearranges the world you'll inhabit from that moment onward. Say yes to an invitation, and your path bends toward the people you'll meet there. Say no, and those meetings never happen, leaving entire stories unwritten. This isn't just poetry. Physicists talk about branching possibilities in quantum terms, where the future isn't fixed but spread out across a range of potential states. In human life, the branches are no less real, even if we can only walk one at a time. The missed opportunities, the roads not taken, the lives unlived, they don't vanish in a puff of nothingness. They linger in the imagination, haunting you with the knowledge that reality could have been otherwise. Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. Existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre argued that our freedom to choose is both our greatest gift and our heaviest burden. Every decision is an act of creation, not just for the self, but for the world it inhabits. When you choose, you affirm one version of reality over another, and that choice becomes a stone dropped into water, sending ripples far beyond what you can see. Sometimes, the ripples are immediate. A chance conversation shifts your beliefs, or a single glance sparks years of connection. Other times, the changes lie dormant, like seeds waiting for the right season. A choice you made years ago, to learn a skill, to end a relationship, to take a job, may only now be flowering into consequences you couldn't have imagined at the time. And then there's the strange symmetry of regret. Regret is not just sorrow for what happened. It's grief for the version of you that might have existed in the other world. We don't just miss events. We miss the selves we never became, the friend you never met, the courage you never tested, the failures that could have shaped you differently. This way of seeing things can be overwhelming. If every choice matters, then every moment carries the weight of creation. But it can also be liberating. It means that change is always possible, that a single decision, however small, can tilt the balance toward a life that feels more your own. It's worth remembering that you never choose in isolation. The self making the choice today is built from the choices of the selves who came before. You are their echo, their inheritor, their unfinished work. And one day, the person you become will look back at you, the version alive right now, and judge you by the world you left behind. But here's the question that lingers. If every choice creates a new world, then what about the choices you think you've made freely? How many of them were truly yours? How many were shaped by forces you couldn't see, by patterns laid down long before you could resist them? Because if the self is always shifting, and if every decision flows from a self that wasn't the same yesterday, then perhaps the freedom you think you have is more fragile than it appears. Life without free will. Picture yourself standing at a crossroads. Two roads curve away into the distance, one toward a city, the other toward the sea. You pause, weigh the options, and feel the moment of decision approach. You believe that you could choose either road, and that belief feels like the very definition of freedom. But what if that belief is an illusion? Neuroscientists have run experiments where they can predict a person's choice seconds before the person consciously makes it. In these studies, tiny shifts in brain activity, invisible to the naked eye, reveal the decision in the making long before the subject reports feeling ready to act. It's as if the mind is a stage where the play has already been written, but the spotlight arrives late, convincing the audience that what they're seeing is spontaneous. Philosophers, too, have been here before. Determinists argue that every action is the inevitable result of prior causes, not just in the immediate past, but stretching back to the birth of the universe. Your decision to take one road or the other is shaped by every influence you've absorbed. The weather, the last conversation you had, the books you've read, the fears you've inherited, even the chemistry of your breakfast. You may feel like you could have chosen differently, but in that exact moment, you couldn't have. This idea can feel suffocating. If free will is an illusion, then what happens to responsibility, to morality, to the pride you take in your achievements? If your choices were never truly free, can you still call them yours? Some thinkers find comfort in reframing the question. Instead of picturing yourself as a free agent moving through the world, imagine yourself as the world moving through you. Every thought, every impulse, the result of billions of interconnected causes playing out in this one unique place and time. The self becomes less a captain steering the ship and more a wave rising from the ocean, shaped by forces it will never fully know. And yet, the absence of free will doesn't have to erase meaning. If anything, it can deepen compassion. When you understand that people act as they do because they could not have acted otherwise, it becomes harder to see them simply as villains or heroes. Their lives, like yours, are the unfolding of countless conditions, many of them unseen and unchosen. Still, something in us resists this view. We want to believe in the moment of choice, in the spark of autonomy that separates the human from the machine. Perhaps that resistance is itself part of the design, a built-in illusion to keep the story of self coherent enough to function. After all, believing you are free might make you act as if you are, and that may be enough to keep life moving forward. But if the currents are always carrying you, then the only thing left to decide, if decide is even the right word, might be what you pay attention to as you drift. Because even if you can't control the river, you can still turn your gaze toward the stars, or the shore, or the face of the one beside you. And maybe it is there, in the quiet act of noticing, that a different kind of freedom hides, not the freedom to choose your path, but the freedom to shape the world by the way you see it. Reality depends on your attention. The world is full, impossibly full. Every second, millions of details rush toward you. The hum of a distant engine, the smell of rain in the air, the faint pressure of clothing against your skin, the silent drift of your own thoughts. But you notice almost none of it. What you call your reality is only the thin slice you happen to be paying attention to. Psychologists sometimes compare attention to a spotlight in a dark theater. Wherever the beam falls, the scene feels vivid, alive, undeniable. Everything outside the light fades into shadow, still there but absent from your experience. Look at a single face in a crowd, and the rest of the city blurs. Listen for the ticking of a clock, and the conversation around you disappears. It's not that the other details have stopped existing, they've simply fallen out of your world. This selective nature of attention doesn't just filter reality, it constructs it. Two people standing in the same place can inhabit entirely different worlds simply because they notice different things. One sees opportunity, the other sees threat. One focuses on beauty, the other on flaws. It's not that one is wrong, it's that the mind builds reality from what it gathers, and what it gathers is never the whole. Philosophers have taken this further. William James, often called the father of modern psychology, wrote that, "My experience is what I agree to attend to." The agreement is unconscious most of the time, shaped by habit, desire, fear, and belief. Your mind has been trained, by culture, upbringing, and personal history, to turn the beam of your attention in familiar directions. And so the same world can be a place of wonder or despair, depending on where you've learned to look. Consider how this plays out in the smallest moments. Notice the times you've stared at a screen while someone was speaking to you and realized you couldn't remember a single word. Or the times you've walked a familiar route without seeing anything because your mind was elsewhere entirely. In those moments, a different world was happening all around you, a world you didn't live in because your attention was somewhere else. This is why attention feels powerful. It is not just a lens, it is a sculptor. Where you place it shapes what is real to you, what matters, what feels possible. And yet we rarely guard it with the care it deserves. We let it be pulled, hijacked and traded away by glowing screens, by the urgency of others, by the endless noise of demands that do not belong to us. If your attention is the raw material from which your reality is built, then whoever controls your attention, in a way, controls your life. This is why some philosophers see the battle for awareness as the most important struggle of the modern world, not because the world has grown darker, but because the lights inside our minds are being constantly turned away from what might let us see clearly. And perhaps the most overlooked influence of all is the way our attention is trained by other people. Long before you could choose where to look, someone else was guiding your gaze toward what was safe, toward what was dangerous, toward what was worth your time. You learned not just to see, but what to see and how to see it. And in this way, the attention you call your own may carry voices you didn't even know you'd inherited. The self, made of others' voices. Close your eyes and think of a single sentence you've said to yourself recently. Maybe a quiet encouragement, a sharp criticism, or a casual observation. Now listen closely to the tone of that sentence. Does it sound like you, or does it sound like someone else? Most people never notice it, but much of our inner speech isn't ours in the way we think it is. The words you speak to yourself are stitched together from fragments you've absorbed from other people, parents, friends, teachers, strangers, even characters in books and films. Over time, these voices overlap and blend until they sound like one, and we call that blended sound me. Think of the phrases you repeat when you make a mistake. Are they your original inventions or echoes of something once said to you? Consider the beliefs you hold about your worth, your limits, your potential. Many of them were planted long before you could decide whether to accept them. Praise, criticism, warnings, and offhand remarks all became part of the script you now deliver to yourself every day. Psychologists describe this as internalization, the process of taking external voices and making them part of your own identity. As children, we rely on others to tell us who we are. We don't just learn facts, we learn ourselves through their eyes. You're shy, you're smart, you're difficult, you're a natural leader. These descriptions, repeated enough, start to feel like undeniable truths rather than opinions. And once inside, they guide your choices, shaping the life you believe is available to you. But not all inherited voices are harmful. Some are gifts: the mentor who believed in you before you believed in yourself, the friend who challenged you to take a risk, the loved one whose steady reassurance you still hear on the worst days. In this sense, we are all composites, carrying both the burdens and the blessings of those who have spoken into our lives. Philosophically, this raises a strange question. If so much of you is made from others, what part is purely your own? Is there a self beneath the voices, or is the self nothing more than the sum of those voices? Some traditions suggest that searching for an untouched core is futile, that we are by nature social mirrors, reflecting and refracting each other endlessly. You can feel the truth of this in subtle ways. A different friend brings out a different side of you. A change in environment changes the thoughts that come to mind. It's not that you're being inauthentic in one place or another. It's that authenticity itself may be more fluid than we like to admit. The danger is forgetting where the voices came from. When we stop recognizing them as inherited, they harden into unquestioned truths. You might follow a path because an old voice says you should, never realizing that voice belonged to someone with their own fears, their own blind spots, their own untested beliefs. And this is where the power lies, in noticing the difference between the voices you've chosen to keep and the ones you've simply never challenged. In doing so, you start to rewrite the script. You begin to tell your own story, or at least to choose which stories you're willing to live inside. But even then, a deeper question lingers. If your self is woven from voices, and those voices are part of stories they believed, then perhaps even the story you tell about yourself is not entirely your own. Perhaps it is, in its way, a kind of fiction. All stories, even yours, are fiction. From the moment you wake, you begin telling yourself a story, It's not a story in words, at least not at first. It's a weaving together of what happened yesterday, what you expect today, and what you hope or fear will come next. Every action, every decision, every memory fits somewhere into this invisible thread. And without it, your life might feel like a box of scattered photographs, images with no order, no arc, no meaning. The story is how you explain yourself to yourself. It has a main character, you, with a past that shapes their motives, a present that demands their attention, and a future they're moving toward. You may not write it consciously, but you edit it constantly. You leave out the dull moments. You compress time. You reinterpret events to make them fit the plot. That plot is where the fiction begins. Not because you lie to yourself deliberately, but because memory and perception are imperfect tools. They don't record reality. They reconstruct it. Every memory you revisit is rebuilt in the moment, altered slightly by mood, by context, by the meaning you've since assigned to it. Over time, the reconstruction can drift far from the original event, yet still feel vividly, unquestionably true. Philosophers have long noticed this. Nietzsche wrote about the falsifying powers of memory, not as a flaw, but as a necessity. We cannot hold all of reality in our minds, so we compress it into a version we can bear, one that lets us keep moving. In that compression, details are lost, connections are invented, and inconsistencies are smoothed over until they vanish. Even the most honest self-story leaves things out. It has to. If you included every moment, every perspective, every possibility, the story would collapse under its own weight. The mind is a ruthless editor, cutting entire chapters to keep the narrative moving forward. But here's the paradox. The story you live by can empower you or imprison you. If the plot says you're resilient, you will find ways to live up to that. If it says you're doomed to fail, you may shape your life to prove it right, and both are fictions, self-fulfilling ones. The danger isn't in telling a story. The danger is in forgetting it's a story. When you believe it's the whole truth, you close yourself off to other ways of seeing, other ways of being. You start defending the plot instead of questioning it. This is why some philosophies urge you to hold your personal narrative lightly, to remember that the you in your story is a character, not the entirety of what you are. There are parts of you that will never make it into the plot. There are versions of you that don't appear in the narrative at all because they don't serve the arc you've unconsciously chosen. If every life is a work of fiction, then perhaps the most honest thing you can do is to acknowledge that, not to abandon the story entirely, but to keep a window open, a place where other truths, other possibilities can slip in. And in doing so, you may also notice something more humbling, that the story you tell about yourself is only one among billions. Each person you pass on the street is living inside their own version, each as vivid and self-centered as yours. Which raises an unsettling question. If every story casts its teller as the center, what does that mean for your place in the world beyond your own narrative? A universe without you at center. Stand outside on a clear night. Look up at the stars. Not just a quick glance, really let your eyes adjust. Let the sky fill your vision until the rest of the world fades. Somewhere up there are galaxies so distant that their light has traveled for billions of years just to meet you now. And here's the humbling truth. They would still be there if you never looked. It is natural to see life from the inside out, to believe, even if only in the background of your mind, that you are the still point around which events revolve. You are the witness, the narrator, the central thread that connects the scenes. But step back far enough, and the illusion begins to crumble. The world does not orbit your awareness. It spins on without your permission, without your knowledge, and without your presence. Astronomy has been dismantling this illusion for centuries. We learned that Earth is not the center of the cosmos, that our star is one of hundreds of billions in our galaxy, and that our galaxy itself is only one among countless others. In physical terms, your body is no more the center than a dust mote in a shaft of light. And yet, the feeling of centrality is stubborn. In daily life, your needs, your emotions, your desires take priority, not because you're selfish, but because you experience the world through them. A friend cancels dinner, and it feels like a comment on you, rather than the result of their own private storms. A stranger cuts you off in traffic, and you take it personally, as if you were the axis around which their choices turned. Philosophers have tried to loosen this grip. The Stoics taught that much of human suffering comes from confusing what is within our control with what is not, a confusion made worse by the belief that events should somehow conform to our plans. Buddhist thought goes further, suggesting that clinging to a sense of self-importance is a root cause of dissatisfaction because it puts you in constant friction with a reality that refuses to bend around you. Seeing yourself as one thread in a vast and indifferent tapestry can be disorienting. It can also be freeing. The petty slights, the daily irritations, the endless comparing, they lose their weight when you remember that the world's machinery doesn't pause for them. And if the world doesn't revolve around you, you are free to let go of the exhausting work of trying to control it. But there's another side to this realization. If you are not the center, then neither are your current desires the fixed law of your existence. They, too, are just passing features in a much larger landscape. And when you begin to see them this way, you may start to notice how they pull you, shape you, and even quietly decide the kind of person you will become. Desire shapes who you become. Desire announces itself quietly at first, a passing thought, a flicker of curiosity, a faint pull towards something just out of reach. But if you follow it, even without much thought, it begins to leave fingerprints on the shape of your life. It's easy to think of desire as something you have, like an accessory you can put on or take off at will. But in truth, desire is more like a compass. It points you toward certain places, people, and experiences, and away from others. And every time you follow it, you take a step toward becoming the kind of person who follows that particular pull. Over time, the compass can change, sometimes suddenly, sometimes almost imperceptibly. You might spend years chasing one thing only to find it has lost its taste, replaced by something new. But the path you walk to get there remains part of you, etched into your habits, your skills, even your identity. Philosophers from Aristotle to modern thinkers have recognized the shaping power of desire. Aristotle saw it as the beginning of all deliberate action. First comes wanting, then comes doing, and in the doing, you become. The desires you nurture are not just reflections of who you are, they are blueprints for who you will be. This is why not all desires are equal. Some pull you toward growth, empathy, and connection. Others spiral you into patterns that narrow your world and diminish you. And the difficulty is that both can feel equally compelling in the moment. Desire also rarely travels alone. It comes bundled with values, fears, and imagined futures. The desire to be admired, for example, can lead you to cultivate talents or to chase approval so relentlessly that you lose sight of yourself. The desire for comfort can bring peace or trap you in a shrinking circle of avoidance. Here's the subtle part. You may think you're choosing your desires, but often they're choosing you. They're shaped by the voices you've absorbed, the culture you inhabit, the stories you've been told about what matters. Left unexamined, they can steer you into a life that feels familiar, but not fully your own. This is why some traditions, like certain schools of Buddhism, teach the careful observation of desire, not to eliminate it entirely, but to see it clearly enough that it no longer controls you blindly. When you know what you want and why, you can decide whether it's a desire worth shaping you. And there is always a shaping. Every pursuit, every longing, every repeated act of reaching for something leaves its mark. One day, you look back and realize you've become the sum of what you've sought. But in seeing this, another question arises. If the things you desire can alter your very sense of self, then perhaps the self is not the fixed face you think you are wearing. Perhaps it is more like the surface in which all these longings are reflected, changing as they change, catching and releasing them like passing light. You are the mirror, not the face. When you stand before a mirror, the image you see is familiar, but not truly you. It is a reflection, light, bouncing back, a temporary arrangement of shapes and shadows. The face in the glass has no substance of its own. It exists only because you are standing there to cast it. We tend to think of ourselves as the face, the fixed identity, the solid presence at the center of experience. But what if you are more like the mirror? What if your nature is not defined by the image you hold at any given moment, but by your capacity to reflect whatever appears before you? The mirror does not choose what to display. It reflects whatever stands in front of it: joy, grief, anger, love, without clinging to any of them. The reflection changes constantly, but the surface beneath remains untouched. In the same way, your awareness holds thoughts, emotions, and sensations without being any one of them. This idea is not new. In Vedantic philosophy, the self, the deeper self, is often described as pure awareness, a mirror untouched by what it reflects. In certain schools of Buddhism, the metaphor shifts slightly. The mirror is still there, but it gathers dust. The dust is our conditioning, our assumptions, our attachments. We mistake the dust for the mirror itself, forgetting that beneath it lies a clear and open surface. The trouble begins when we confuse the reflection for the reality. We see ourselves angry and decide we are an angry person. We catch ourselves afraid and decide we are fearful. But these are passing images. They may repeat, they may leave long shadows, but they are not the mirror itself. This shift in perspective can be quietly transformative. If you are the mirror, you are not bound to any single role, mood, or identity. You can hold them, experience them fully, and then watch them fade without needing to grasp or resist. In that space, you might begin to see yourself not as a fixed character in a story, but as the open field in which the story unfolds. Yet this raises another question. If you are the mirror, what determines the images that appear? Why do certain patterns, certain faces, certain events keep returning, while others never seem to cross your path? And if the mirror itself is clear and uncolored, why does the world you see sometimes seem distorted? The answer may lie not in the mirror itself, but in the way it is angled, the direction in which it's turned, the light it's given, the lens through which it's seen. What you see lives in your mind. Look at a tree. It seems simple enough. There it is, standing in the world, independent of you. But pause and notice what's actually happening. You're not seeing the tree itself. You're seeing light reflected from its surface, processed by your eyes, translated into electrical signals, and interpreted by your brain. The tree you experience exists inside your mind, assembled from sensory data and past knowledge. This is true for everything you perceive. You never encounter the raw world directly. You meet a version of it constructed in the theater of your awareness. Your mind fills in gaps, smooths over contradictions, and colors perception with expectations. Look quickly at a friend's face, and you might see them as they've always been, even if time has subtly altered their features. Your brain prefers a consistent world, so it edits reality to match the story it already holds. Philosophers have been wrestling with this for centuries. Immanuel Kant argued that we can never know the thing in itself, reality, as it truly is, separate from perception. We only know the phenomenon, the reality shaped by the mind's structures. What you see, hear, and feel is not the world in its pure form, but the world as filtered through your senses and interpreted by your mental models. This means that reality, in a lived sense, is deeply personal. Two people can stand side by side, looking at the same sunset, and have entirely different experiences. One sees beauty, the other melancholy. One notices the colors, the other remembers a loss. The sunset itself hasn't changed. The worlds inside their minds have. The unsettling part is how much of this happens without your awareness. You believe you're seeing the world as it is, but in truth, you're experiencing a version sculpted by memory, language, emotion, and bias. Even something as basic as color is not fixed in the world. It exists only in the mind's interpretation of wavelengths. This isn't to say the external world doesn't exist, only that the version you live in is one among many possible renderings. Recognizing this can bring humility. It can soften the certainty that your perspective is the correct one. And it can open a quiet curiosity. If what I see leaves in my mind, what else could be here if I learned to look differently? But there's another layer to this. If perception is shaped by memory, and memory itself is fragile and shifting, then the very ground of your personal reality is never as solid as it feels. The mind that sees is also the mind that remembers, and the gap between those two can change the way you understand who you are. The gap between self and memory. Think of the last time you told a story about yourself, maybe to a friend, maybe just in your own head. You described what happened, how you felt, what it meant. It felt true. And yet, that truth was not a perfect record. It was a reconstruction, built from fragments of memory, filtered through the person you are now. Memory is not a vault where the past is stored untouched. It is more like a stage play, reenacted each time you recall it, with the actors subtly changing their lines, the lighting shifting, the set rearranging itself to suit the mood of the present. Neurologists have found that when we remember something, we reopen the memory to editing. The very act of recall makes it vulnerable to change, to suggestion, to reinterpretation, to the influence of everything we've learned since the original moment. This means the self you remember, the person in those past scenes, is not exactly the self who lived them. You've smoothed over contradictions, removed details that no longer fit, added meaning that wasn't there at the time. In some ways, your remembered self is a collaborative work between who you were and who you've become. Philosophers have wrestled with this strange loop. If your sense of self is built from memories, and those memories are malleable, then the you think you are is built on shifting ground. John Locke argued that personal identity is tied to memory. You are the same person because you remember being that person. But modern research complicates this. What if the memories themselves are altered? What if they're incomplete or even false? Consider this. Your earliest memories are likely just flashes, a sound, a texture, a vague image, and yet you fill them in with narrative. You imagine the missing pieces, unconsciously blending fact with invention until the memory feels whole. And because it feels whole, you trust it, you weave it into the story of who you are, letting it shape decisions, beliefs, and relationships. This gap between the self who lived and the self you remember can be a source of quiet tension. You might look back on a moment of courage and feel proud, not realizing that at the time you were terrified and only acted because you saw no other choice. You might recall a loss as a turning point, even if its meaning was only clear in hindsight. The self you carry in memory is not a perfect reflection. It is a curated portrait, touched up over years of retelling. And yet, this is not a flaw. The fluidity of memory allows you to reinterpret the past in ways that can heal, inspire, or free you. It can also trap you if the edited story becomes a cage, a fixed identity that leaves no room for change. The challenge is to notice when you are living for the remembered self instead of the present one. Because while the past shapes you, it is only one of the forces at work. There is also the self you imagine becoming, and the self you actually live as today. And the space between those two can be even more revealing than the space between memory and reality. Imagined self versus lived self. In your mind, there is a version of you that feels almost real. This imagined self is everything you hope to be, or everything you fear you might become. You carry them like a shadow that stretches forward in time, visible only to you. The imagined self has perfect clarity of vision. They know what to say in every conversation, how to respond to every challenge. They don't stumble. They don't second guess. They don't hesitate. Or, in darker moments, they are the person you worry you'll turn into if you fail to change course, bitter, closed off, endlessly repeating the same mistakes. This imagined version shapes more of your life than you might think. It influences the goals you set, the risks you take, the relationships you pursue or avoid. Sometimes it pushes you forward, giving you something to aim for. Other times it paralyzes you because no action in reality can match the perfection or escape the dread of the version in your head. The lived self is different. The lived self wakes up groggy, forgets names, feels awkward in silence, gets distracted. The lived self makes decisions under pressure, without the luxury of rewinding the scene to find the perfect line. They get it wrong. They change their mind. They do the opposite of what the imagined self would have done, and sometimes they don't even know why. The space between these two selves can be inspiring. It's what fuels growth, but it can also be exhausting. You measure the messy truth of your days against the idealized image in your mind, and the gap feels like failure. Even when you've achieved something your past self would have dreamed of, the imagined self moves the goalposts, always a few steps further ahead. Philosophers have long warned about the danger of chasing an ideal without reckoning with the present. Søren Kierkegaard wrote about the despair of not willing to be oneself, of living in constant comparison to an abstract version of the self, rather than embracing the flawed, unfinished person you actually are. There's also a subtler trap. The imagined self can become a substitute for action. You feel good imagining yourself as someone disciplined, kind, or courageous, so good that you don't always do the work to make it real. You rehearse conversations you'll never have, victories you'll never pursue, transformations that never arrive. The mind rewards you with a taste of satisfaction just for imagining it. But the lived self is where your real life happens. It's the one that gets out of bed, shows up, speaks aloud, touches the world. It's the one that feels the consequences and carries the weight of your choices. If the imagined self is a sketch, the lived self is the painting, messy, layered, unpredictable, but also alive. Bridging the gap between the two doesn't mean killing the imagined self. It means letting them guide you without letting them control you. It means understanding that your ideals are not blueprints to be perfectly followed, but stars to navigate by, knowing you'll never stand exactly where they shine. And perhaps, in seeing this clearly, you might also notice something stranger, that even the imagined self isn't entirely your own creation. Their features, their mannerisms, their ideals, they may be borrowed, consciously or not, from the countless influences you've absorbed over a lifetime. Which raises a deeper question about where any of our visions of self truly come from. Originality might be a myth. We like to think of our ideas as ours alone, sparks that appear in the mind out of nowhere, pure products of personal insight. But look closely, and you'll see that even your most original thoughts are built from pieces you didn't invent. Every book you've read, every song you've heard, every conversation you've had has left its mark. You absorb not only the words, but the rhythms of speech, the turns of thought, the ways of framing the world. Over years, these fragments layer themselves in your mind, mixing and rearranging until they feel like something new. When an idea finally rises to the surface, it feels like a creation, but in truth, it is a collage. Philosophers and artists have long understood this. Mark Twain once wrote that there is no such thing as a new idea. We simply take a lot of old ideas and put them into a sort of mental kaleidoscope. When you turn the cylinder, the same fragments form new patterns, beautiful, surprising, even brilliant, but the pieces themselves have been there all along. Even the act of invention often rests on borrowed foundations. The scientist who makes a breakthrough is standing on the work of countless others. The writer crafting a fresh metaphor is drawing on a web of cultural references. The painter mixing colors is using pigments whose properties were discovered long before they were born. This doesn't make creativity meaningless. If anything, it makes it more human. We are creatures of recombination. Our originality lies not in conjuring something from nothing, but in noticing connections others have overlooked, in combining influences in ways that feel alive. In this sense, originality is less about ownership and more about transformation. But there's a quiet danger in the myth of pure originality. It can make you believe you must create in isolation, waiting for an untouched idea to appear, when in fact the richest ideas often come from engaging deeply with what already exists. It can also make you overprotective of your creations, forgetting that they are part of a larger conversation, one that began before you and will continue long after. Seen clearly, the myth of originality humbles and liberates at once. It humbles because it reminds you that you are not the sole author of your thoughts. It liberates because it frees you from the impossible task of being the first. You can instead aim to be authentic, to let the work reflect your perspective, shaped by the unique way your experiences have arranged the shared pieces. And perhaps this recognition points towards something even broader. If no idea is entirely your own, then maybe the same is true for everything you think you possess. The mind, the body, the objects you hold, they too have origins that stretch far beyond you. Nothing you own is really yours. Look around the room you're in. Every object, the chair you sit on, the clothes you wear, the device you're using to hear these words, carries a history you probably never think about. You may call these things yours, but they have lived many lives before they reached you, and they will continue to live after you're gone. Ownership is one of the most powerful illusions we share. You buy a book and write your name inside its cover, and it feels like a claim. But the paper came from trees you've never seen, harvested by hands you've never met. The words were shaped by a mind that may no longer walk the earth. You might keep it for years, but one day it will pass to someone else, or to the quiet decay that swallows all possessions in time. Even the body you inhabit is only on loan. Its materials were gathered from the world long before your birth. Minerals from ancient rocks, water from rivers older than human memory, carbon that once drifted in the air or pulsed in the blood of other creatures. When you die, those materials will scatter again, returning to the endless cycle that lent them to you for a season. Philosophers like the Stoics saw this clearly. Epictetus reminded his students that nothing external is truly theirs, not even the people they love. Everything is given for an unknown length of time, and everything will eventually be taken back. This was not meant to strip life of joy, but to free it from the fear and grasping that come from believing we can hold the world still. In truth, ownership is more like stewardship. You tend to what passes through your life. You use it, care for it, sometimes transform it, but you cannot stop it from moving on. Even the things you think you've made yourself are assembled from parts and influences you did not invent. This perspective can feel unsettling in a culture that celebrates possession as proof of success. We're taught that the more we own, the more secure we are. But when you see how temporary ownership really is, the meaning shifts. Security does not come from holding tightly, but from learning to let go without fear. There's a strange beauty in realizing that everything you own is only visiting. It connects you to the countless others who have held the same things, worn the same materials, stood on the same ground. The ring on your finger may carry the atoms of ancient mountains. The air you breathe may have passed through the lungs of strangers, animals, even kings and poets long gone. Once you see it this way, ownership begins to feel less like a solitary claim and more like a moment in a vast relay, one link in an unbroken chain of exchange. You are part of an endless chain. Hold out your hand and look at it for a moment. The skin carries a color you didn't choose, the lines etched by years you only half remember. Inside, there are traces of strangers, farmers, machinists, teachers, the quiet hands that tightened bolts on the buses you rode, the programmers who shaped the device in your pocket, the midwife who lifted your first cry into air. Even your hand's blueprint is borrowed, a lattice of code whispered through generations, carried by people who never knew your name. It's tempting to draw a circle around your life and call everything inside it mine. But step back, and the edges dissolve. Every meal you've eaten is a long story. Rain on distant soil, seeds bred by ancestors, labor bent over fields, a chain of metal, fuel, roads, invoices, signatures you swallow, and the world continues inside you. Later, what's left returns to the earth, and something new begins. The same is true for your thoughts. The idea that changed your mind last year might have begun as a sentence in a book written by someone who learned it from a teacher, who learned it from a critic, who learned it from a friend, a river of influence winding backward through time. Even rebellion is derivative. We push against the forms we've inherited, and the shape of our resistance is carved by the thing we resist. When you begin to see the chains, life expands. You realize that your achievements aren't solo performances, and your failures rarely belong to you alone. There were scaffolds you didn't build, winds you didn't summon, obstacles set in motion long before you arrived. This recognition doesn't erase responsibility. It reframes it. You are not a lone author but a co-writer, and your pages lean on many hands. There's humility in this view, but there is power too. If the world moves through chains, then a small change in your link travels further than you think. A single honest conversation softens someone who softens someone else. A decision to learn the name of the person who cleans your building alters the way you see all invisible labor. A kindness offered to the version of you who is exhausted tonight may be the difference that keeps a distant promise alive. Ancient traditions saw this clearly. In some cultures, people speak of ancestors not as ghosts but as currents, forces of character and habit that continue through us. We inherit more than the shape of our bones. We inherit tendencies, fears, and strengths, then decide whether to pass them forward. To break a harmful pattern is an act of quiet heroism. To pass along something better is a form of gratitude paid into the future. Even your breath ties you to the chain. The air inside your lungs was a leaf's labor. A moment ago, it was the exhale of a stranger, a bird's wing beat, a winter storm over an ocean you've never seen. You borrow it, transform it, return it. The exchange is constant, indifferent, and intimate. Seen this way, isolation becomes a myth too small for the truth. No one stands alone. Our joy is communal, our despair contagious, our attention a scarce resource that can feed or starve what grows around us. The chain is not just behind you. It radiates outward in every direction, to the people you love, to the ones you will never meet, to the more than human world that keeps you alive without applause. This can feel like a burden at first. If everything touches everything else, where do you begin? But the chain doesn't ask you to hold it all. It asks you to tend your link, to repair what you can reach, to choose, among the many possible continuations, the one you would be proud to pass on. There is a quiet test you can try. Imagine the person who will stand where you stand in 50 years, in a room you'll never enter, breathing air that once moved through your chest. What will your time have left on their tongue? A bitterness? A sweetness? A silence? The answer won't be in grand declarations. It will be in the small, repeating gestures you practice when no one is watching. Those are the ones that travel. And yet, for all this talk of connection, none of us perceives the whole tapestry. We live through a keyhole. We notice some threads and miss countless others. Entire chains of consequence exist just beyond the edge of our awareness, shaping us while we look elsewhere, which is its own kind of responsibility. In a world too vast to grasp, what you choose to look away from may define your link as much as what you embrace. Because in the end, the chain continues not only through what you carry forward, but through what you refuse to see, and the things you do not see keep working on you, quietly, patiently, all the same. The power of what you ignore. Stand in a noisy cafe and try this. Choose one sound, the spoon tapping a cup, the hiss of steam, and hold it in your awareness. In a few seconds, the room rearranges itself. Conversations blur into a soft wall. The clatter of plates recedes. Nothing outside you has changed, yet your world is different. Selection is not passive. It edits reality. We talk a lot about what to pursue: goals, habits, virtues, but the quieter shaping force is what you refuse to give your attention. Your life is not only the sum of what you look at, it is the negative space around that gaze, the things you never click, the arguments you don't enter, the invitations you decline. Every no is a chisel. With it, you carve a shape from the avalanche of possibilities that crash toward you each day. There's a reason artists speak of composition by omission. A painting is as much what the painter leaves out as what they place on the canvas. Your days work the same way. Ignore outrage bait, and your mind grows calmer, more porous to nuance. Ignore the endless comparison game, and your values stop twitching toward whatever sparkles. Ignore the constant drip of minor temptations, and your deeper desires have a chance to speak at a normal volume. Psychologists have a name for how dramatically attention sculpts experience: inattentional blindness. You can stare at a scene and miss the most obvious thing if you didn't decide it mattered beforehand. In one famous study, people counting basketball passes often didn't notice a person in a costume walking through the frame. It isn't that their eyes failed, their agreement about what to ignore succeeded. Your mind performs this triage all day long. The question isn't whether you're ignoring, it's whether you're doing it on purpose. There's a moral dimension here too. What you filter out doesn't just protect your focus, it reveals your loyalties. To ignore small cruelties because they are familiar is to help them survive. To ignore the labor behind your conveniences is to accept a story with the middle torn out. Selective blindness can be mercy, refusing to rehearse an old grievance, but it can also be complicity. The line is drawn by care. Are you turning away to heal and build, or to avoid the cost of seeing? Boundaries are a form of chosen ignorance. Not ignorance as insult, but ignorance as craft, the gardener pulling weeds so the tree has light. You cannot give everything attention without hollowing it of meaning. A boundary is the sentence: this gets my life, and that does not. Spoken with enough conviction that your calendar believes you. You may disappoint others. You will certainly disappoint the infinite appetites of your devices. But the point of a door is not to keep everything out. It's to let the right things in. Notice too how ignoring reshapes identity. You are different when you decline to be baited. You are different when you let a silence stay unfilled, when you choose not to answer a message that only wants your agitation. Many vows are simply disciplined abstentions. I will not consume that fuel. I will not become that reaction. Over time, these vows write themselves into your face, the lines of a person who did not rush toward every flashing light, who fed certain capacities and allowed others to starve. But ignoring is not the same as numbing. Numbing flattens the world so nothing can reach you. Wise ignoring heightens what matters by clearing its surround. Numbing says, nothing is worth feeling. Ignoring says, this is worth everything. I won't spend myself elsewhere. One makes you smaller, the other makes you precise. There's a gentler use too, ignoring as forgiveness. Not the dramatic declaration, but the daily decision not to reopen the case file. You stop feeding the grievance with fresh attention. You let the ember cool. Eventually it becomes an old stone in the yard. Still there, still a part of the landscape, no longer burning your hand every time you walk by. And then there is the most radical act of all, temporarily ignoring the story you tell about yourself. The biography is useful. It offers continuity and responsibility, but it can also overrule the present with old verdicts. If you never look away from your labels, anxious, gifted, late bloomer, failure, survivor, you may never notice the ways they have outlived their accuracy. Try this experiment for an hour. Set aside the file folder named Me. Do not consult it before you speak, work, rest. Let the moment tell you what is needed. You may find capacities that your past never made room for. Because the world is larger than you can hold, neglect is inevitable. But neglect chosen with care becomes a tool. You starve distractions so attention grows strong. You starve resentments so tenderness can breathe. You starve false urgencies so real-time, the kind that tastes like presence, can return to your mouth. Of course, the past will knock. It always does. It brings its exhibits, its recordings, its certainty about who you are. You don't have to banish it. Just notice that memory is a lobbyist with excellent stationery. You can hear its case without letting it write the law. And on some mornings, you can decline the meeting altogether. Step outside with empty hands and ask, without reference to prior drafts, what it would mean to live this hour as if you had never been told your role. If you can do that, even briefly, a peculiar quiet opens. The names soften. The rehearsed answers forget their lines. What remains is not a perfect blankness, but a freshness like air after rain. And in that freshness, a different question becomes possible. If you were not required to be the person your memories predict, who would you be now? Who you are without a past. Imagine waking before dawn and finding that nothing arrives to meet you. No flood of yesterday's concerns. No list of the people who love or resent you. No string of scenes to prove who you've been. Your name is there, perhaps, like a faint watermark, but the file it belongs to won't open. You stand, feel the floor, notice the air, and for a brief and startling moment you are not anyone in particular. You are simply here. Most of us never taste that emptiness except in slivers, the seconds just after waking, or when a landscape is so new it wipes the chalkboard clean. But imagine it lasting longer. No biography to consult. No old injuries to protect. No trophies to defend. What would guide your next move? What would kindness mean when it isn't busy repairing yesterday? What would fear do without its favorite archive? Philosophers tied identity to memory for centuries. John Locke thought that personal identity stretches as far back as memory can reach. If so, erase the recollection and the self thins like a shoreline at high tide. Yet daily life suggests something remains even when memory wavers. The body remembers how to walk, the hands how to tie a knot, the mouth how to form a word. Habits keep acting after the storyteller falls silent. Perhaps the person you are is not a cabinet of stories, but a choreography of tendencies, the way you lean toward or away, the angle of your listening, the pace at which you forgive. There is freedom in this thought. If who you are is not the museum of your past, but the shape you give this hour, then the door to change is never locked. You can pause before the reflexive reply and let a different sentence emerge. You can meet an old pattern and interrupt its cue. You can sit with a feeling without asking it for its genealogy. Without the obligation to be consistent with a previous draft, you can be accurate to the moment instead. And yet, there is loss. The past stitches meaning through time. It ties today's work to yesterday's promise, lets grief ripen into tenderness, lets loyalty mean something more than convenience. Without it, duties blur. Are promises still binding if the promiser can't remember making them? If blame can't find its ledger, does harm evaporate? We sense that the answer must be no. The world runs on continuities larger than any single person's recollection. Amnesia doesn't annul consequence. The human circle keeps the memory even when the individual cannot. But in your private interior, without a past to glare over your shoulder, the scale shifts. Shame has nothing to quote. Pride has fewer crowns to polish. You discover how much of your daily posture is an echo, defending what no one is attacking, performing for audiences that aren't here. The quiet that remains is not blank. It is precise. It asks, what is needed now in this room, with this breath, for this living thing before you? There is a practice hidden here. You can temporarily set the archive down without denying it exists. For an hour, allow no sentence that begins with, I always or I never. Refuse inherited verdicts. Treat each encounter as if it were the first and only. Watch how your body changes its angle. Watch how generosity becomes easier when it isn't busy balancing old accounts. Watch how curiosity returns when you're not trying to keep your past self consistent. This shedding isn't an escape from responsibility. It is a renewal of it. When you loosen the grip of yesterday, you become more responsible to what is actually in front of you. Compassion expands, not because you have forgotten what people did, but because you are no longer trapped in the reflex to replay it. Creativity widens, not because the past was worthless, but because it was never meant to be a ceiling. Of course you will pick the story back up. You have people to remember, promises to keep, a lineage to honor. The point is not to live without a past, but to realize that the past is a reference, not a ruler. It can inform your aim without fixing your shape. And when the file begins to feel heavy, you can put it down again and return to the simple, ordinary miracle of being here without a script. Something else appears once the archive quiets, the subtle ways you become different depending on where you stand. Without the biography insisting on a single author, you notice how your voice alters in one room and softens in another, how confidence blooms beside certain faces and vanishes in others, how patience expands at dawn and thins by dusk. It is not deceit, it is the mind's way of answering the world. The self, it turns out, is a fluent thing, and fluency means you change with conversation. If you watch closely, you will see it everywhere. The way your posture straightens in a doorway with your name on it. The way your laughter deepens with an old friend who remembers your earliest version. The way silence feels different at a desk than at a window. You are not only who you recall, you are also who the moment invites and who the moment requires. The stage shifts and you shift with it. Not a betrayal, but a form of intelligence. And that is where the next question waits, patient and bright. If the scene keeps changing and you keep changing with it, who is it that changes? Or put more simply, how many selves learn to speak through your one mouth when the world asks for them, one by one? Identity shifts in every role. You answer the phone and your voice changes. Not by choice exactly, more like a reflex you learned long ago. With a parent, your words soften at the edges. With a colleague, they straighten. With a child, they round into play. You hang up, step into a meeting, greet a neighbor, send a message, and with each doorway, a slightly different you walks through. The body keeps a closet of tones and postures. The mind reaches for them the way a hand reaches for familiar tools. We often treat this as suspicion-worthy, as if a real self were being smuggled under layers of costume. But notice how naturally the shifts happen and how often they are acts of care. You speak more slowly to someone grieving, not because you're pretending, but because your voice becomes a room where they can set their burden down. You become drier with a friend who needs teasing more than sympathy. In each case, you tune yourself to the moment, which is less deception than fluency. Sociologists call this role-taking, but the word role can sound theatrical, as if we are faking our way through life. Another way to see it, you are multilingual in the language of being a person. You know the grammar of listening, the idioms of authority, the dialects of tenderness and urgency. Code switching isn't only about language, it is the whole body art of answering different worlds without breaking. Still, there is a cost when a role hardens. The helpful mask can overstay its welcome and grow heavy. The perfect professional who cannot admit uncertainty. The caretaker who never allows themselves to be cared for. The brave one who cannot set bravery down. When a role becomes a cage, even praise turns into pressure because you are rewarded for being a single version of yourself forever. It helps to remember that roles are agreements, not laws. They are maintained by cues and expectations, by promises you once made to be dependable in a certain shape. Some of those promises are beautiful, others are outdated. You can renegotiate. You can say, I'm learning a new way to be with you, and let the relationship find a wider rhythm. At first, people may try to hand you the old mask, not out of malice, out of habit. Keep breathing. Keep practicing the posture that fits the life you're in now. There are roles you will never fully understand until the world assigns them to you. The first time you become a mentor, a patient, a stranger in a country whose maps your childhood never held, you discover rooms inside yourself that previous roles had kept locked. The surprise is not that you can be different, it's that you were always larger than the costumes allowed. Roles don't invent you, they reveal you by asking different strengths to report for duty. Notice, too, how place participates. In one room, your humor is quick and dry. In another, silence feels more honest than any clever line. At a window, your thoughts widen. At a desk, they braid tightly around a task. Even the time of day recruits a version of you. The person of early morning is not the same as the person of late afternoon. Identity is weathered by context. To insist on absolute sameness everywhere is like insisting the sea hold one shape. Ethically, the question becomes, how do you shift without slipping into exploitation? The answer is simple but not easy. The role must remain in service of truth and care. A role that helps you meet someone where they are is medicine. A role that helps you hide what matters or manipulate trust is poison. The line is drawn by whether after the scene ends, both lives have more room to breathe. There will be conflicts. Two roles will ask you to speak at once. The friend and the manager, the artist and the provider, the child and the parent you've become. You cannot always satisfy them all, but you can name the conflict, which is its own kind of honesty. Two parts of me want different things here. Naming prevents you from blaming the person across from you for a storm that is mostly inside your sky. If you look closely, you'll also see that roles are built from shared symbols, clothes, titles, rituals, job descriptions, gestures, a white coat, a bench, a badge, a keycard, a ring. We believe together that these objects mean certain things, and because we believe, they do. You put one on, and your posture changes. The people around you respond, and a small world snaps into focus. The role is sustained by a loop of mutual expectation. Break the expectation, wear the coat, and offer no authority, hold the title, and refuse its script, and the spell weakens. That word is not an insult. Much of our life runs on spells we cast with each other. We agree that a piece of paper can become money, that a cue is a fair way to take turns, that a handshake seals a promise. Roles are like that. Living fictions we maintain because they help us coordinate, protect, teach, heal, build. They are strongest when we remember they are made, not given that we can remake them when they no longer serve. So perhaps the question isn't whether you are authentic across roles, but whether your roles point toward the same compass. Do they gather you around a center of values you would recognize, even with the costumes off? If so, the shifts are not betrayals, they are harmonies. If not, the dissonance is an invitation to revise. And beneath this all is a subtler insight waiting to be heard, the meanings that tell the roles what to be. Authority, love, success, respect are not private property. They live between us. We inherit them, we adjust them, we pass them along. What feels solid in your hands often depends on 100 other hands holding it up. When we stop holding, the solid thing thins, and the role loses its weight, which suggests something both unsettling and freeing about the whole stage. So much of what we live by is real, because we make it real together, and could be otherwise if together we chose. Meaning is a shared illusion. A child picks up a smooth stone at the edge of the sea and declares it lucky. For the rest of the day they walk differently, as if the world has been quietly tilted in their favor. The stone hasn't changed. The tide hasn't either, but something real has happened. A meaning arrived, and with it a new way of moving through the day. Most of what steadies our lives is like that stone, not false but made. We draw a line on a map and call it a border. Suddenly, a step to the left is home, and a step to the right is abroad. We dye paper green and print a number. It becomes rent, groceries, tuition, fear. We circle a date on a calendar and call it Tuesday, or a wedding, or the anniversary of a loss. The sun rises as usual, but the day feels different in our bodies. Meaning works like weather we invent together, and then live under as if it were the only sky. You can feel the spell in smaller scenes. A referee lifts a whistle, and grass becomes a field with rules. A red light pauses 100 engines because strangers agree that red means wait. A melody plays at the grocery store, and suddenly the tomatoes taste like high school. None of this is lying. It's coordination. We craft shared illusions so we can move as a crowd without colliding. But illusions can harden into walls. The same agreement that lets us trade and plan can also trap us inside outdated frames. Who counts as us? What work deserves respect? Which love qualifies as real? Because meanings are made between us, they can be unmade, and people who benefit from a particular story will call that unmaking chaos. Sometimes it is chaos, sometimes it is repair. Personal meaning is communal too, even when it feels private. The phrase that carries you through a hard year, the ritual that makes a morning feel right, the object that calms you because your grandmother touched it. These are not just yours. They're stitched from language you didn't invent, gestures you learned by watching others, signals your culture taught your nervous system to read as safe. Even grief is a choreography you inherit. The colors, the meals, the silence, the sentences that help pain take a shape it can survive. So is meaning a lie? No, it's a promise. It says, let's pretend together. And while we pretend, we'll build roads, families, symphonies, laws. The danger isn't in pretending. It's in forgetting we're pretending. When we mistake our agreements for granite, we start defending them with a zeal that can make us cruel. We forget that other people are living under different weather, with different stones in their pockets, and we try to force the sky to match. There's freedom in remembering how fragile and powerful meaning is. If it's made, you are not condemned to the first story you were given. You can compose a life from rituals that fit the shape of your care. You can choose holidays that remind you to be the kind of person you want to be. You can rewrite the definition of success so it includes the afternoons you didn't rush, the evenings you listened, the mornings you refused to let urgency steal your attention. Because the worth of a day is another shared illusion, and you are allowed to craft one that leaves you more human at sunset than you were at dawn. Of course, not every thread can be pulled without consequence. Some illusions are load-bearing. Pull too quickly and you drop the roof on people who don't have another shelter. That's why revision is a moral art. You change meanings with the gentleness of a surgeon, not the thrill of a vandal. You ask, whom does this story help live? And whom does it quietly erase? And you adjust your grip accordingly. Still, there are stories that must be broken, even if the shattering is loud. Stories that sort human beings into higher and lower. Stories that praise dominance and disguise harm as virtue. When those meanings lose their believers, the ground shakes, and good. The quake is the sound of rooms being made where there were none. Notice what happens when a meaning collapses in you. The uniform no longer intimidates. The number in the bank account no longer decides your mood. The old sentence, I am only valuable when, finally sounds absurd. The world does not end. It widens. You feel foolish for a moment. Then lighter, you look around and wonder how many other definitions you've been renting without reading the fine print. But here is the quiet truth. Underneath all this, you didn't build your meanings alone, and you won't remodel them alone either. Even the courage to question is a gift you received from someone who questioned before you. Your symbols rise and fall with the pressure of other minds, the warmth of other hands, the rooms where other bodies gather and nod. Meaning is a shared illusion because the sharing is the point. Without the others, there is no spell and no applause, no welcome, no home. Which brings us to the part we underestimate, the constant, invisible shaping of one life by many. If what feels solid under your feet depends on a circle of people holding it up, then your steps are never truly solitary. Every belief you carry, every ritual you love, every value you defend has a human trail behind it. Even when you swear you're thinking for yourself, you are breathing through someone else's lungs. And realizing that is not a loss of dignity. It's the beginning of an honest map, one that shows the currents you're swimming in and the hands that lift you as you move. No one lives outside influence. You picture yourself as an island, a distinct outline on a blue map, but step closer and the shoreline frays. Currents braid through every inlet, birds cross from other coasts, the weather belongs to no one. What you call me is more like a harbor where ships from 1,000 ports unload their cargo, accents and opinions, gestures and fears, cravings you're sure you chose that actually boarded long before you noticed them. Start with something simple, laughter. Put 3 people in a room and let one of them laugh from the belly. Within seconds, the other 2 are laughing too, not because of a joke, but because bodies tune each other like instruments. Emotions travel the same way. A calm person steadies a meeting. A panicked headline tightens the throats of strangers who will never meet the author. Even thoughts carry a kind of social electricity. Spend a week with someone who frames every setback as an insult, and watch how quickly your world starts to bristle. Influence is not only personal, it is infrastructural. Roads teach you where you're supposed to go. Price tags whisper which pleasures are respectable. Algorithms learn your hungers and return them to you dressed as destiny. Architecture trains behavior. Benches with center bars nudge you not to lie down. A window over a sink invites you to look up between dishes and remember there is a sky. None of these forces ask permission. They compose you by repetition. The mind wants to claim exceptions. I think for myself. But thinking is a team sport played across centuries. Your sentences borrow their bones from languages you did not invent. Your ideas wear hand-me-downs from teachers you barely remember, who were themselves stitched by teachers before them. Even rebellion is collaborative. The shape of your no is carved by the yes you push against. A teenager slams the door in the exact rhythm that once echoed down the hallway from a parent. Freedom arrives in a family resemblance. Influence works forward, too, through the small theater of example. A single person in a crosswalk can slow a line of cars. One neighbor who plants a tree changes the amount of summer shade for houses they will never enter. You hold the door, and 2 people behind you hold the door. You cut in line, and 3 after you cut the line. Your life leaves a comet of behavior the way a boat leaves wake, spreading long after you stop rowing. There's a darker stream, harms that travel silently because they are ordinary. A joke with a sharp edge softens the ground for the next sharper one. An unpaid hour at work becomes the new professionalism. A shortcut taken in secret teaches your hands to love the feel of shortcuts. We inherit these too, not as doctrines but as reflexes. Sometimes the heart knows before the head. You feel tired in a room where nothing wrong is said because every cue says, "Don't be fully here." But influence is not fate. It is weather, strong, shaping, and also shifting. You can't cancel the wind, you can trim the sail. The first movement is noticing. Name the patterns. I am kinder after I've slept. I am harsher after an hour of scrolling. I defer to certainty when I'm afraid. I grow curious when someone mirrors my pace. Naming turns fog into map. The second movement is choosing your proximities. We become porous to what we repeat. If a particular circle keeps you small, step outside it often enough that your lungs relearn their full capacity. If a particular room makes you honest, return to it and bring others with you. Curate your intimacies and your inputs the way a gardener curates light and soil. What you attend to is not neutral, it is diet. The third movement is becoming a better ancestor in real time. Influence is mostly mundane, where you look when someone else speaks, whether you answer with heat or with breath, the ritual you offer a child at bedtime, the way you greet the person who empties the bin under your desk. You do not have to be powerful to be formative. You are formative already. The question is only what shape your wake will leave. Still, humility matters. We overestimate our control and underestimate our entanglement. You will never fully trace the threads that made you, nor the threads you are making now. That doesn't absolve responsibility. It invites gentleness. Go easier on the people whose weather was harsher. Go easier on the earlier versions of you who believed the first spell they were taught. Then, precisely because you are kinder, adjust the spell. Notice how moral clarity appears not in grand abstractions, but in the texture of an hour. You can't edit last year's influences today. You can choose whose tone you echo in this conversation. You can't unwind the architecture of a city this morning. You can design your desk so the easiest thing to reach is the thing that makes you truer. You can't fix the algorithm tonight. You can stand at a window and feed your attention something unmarketed: wind, bird, cloud, the unrepeatable weather of now. which is the quiet hinge of all this. Influence arrives from behind and radiates ahead, but your only lever is the slice of time your hand can touch. The past keeps tugging, the future keeps asking, and still the world is only ever happening here, in the breath you're holding or letting go, in the next look you choose to give, in the next word you allow to leave your mouth. Whatever freedom we have leaves not outside influence but inside presence, where even a small turn of attention can change the current for more than one life. The present is the only place. There's a thin hush before the kettle clicks, before the streetlight hums on, before your phone lights with a name. In that hush, nothing from yesterday is reachable, and nothing from tomorrow can be touched. There is only this small, vivid patch of time, the size of a breath, where a life is actually lived. We talk about time as if we inhabit all of it. Past, future, a grand panorama we can consult at will. But think of how you move. The hand turns the knob now. The eye meets the stranger's gaze now. The apology, if it ever arrives, arrives now or not at all. Memory offers explanations, and the future makes requests, but action only has one address. Every change you have ever made took place inside this narrow room. Now is not a dot, it has a felt width, like a note that lasts just long enough to be heard. Within that span the senses braid together, a taste, a color, a temperature on the skin, and the mind writes its quick captions. Outside it, we're mostly touching shadows, a replay edited by the person we've become, a forecast colored by our hopes and private storms. Useful shadows, sometimes they teach and they warn, but they are sketches. The only canvas with wet paint on it is here. Notice how quickly the room fills with noise the moment you step into it. A message wants your attention. A headline tugs at your fear. An old grievance knocks with impeccable timing. Presence is not passive. It is a refusal. You say no to 1,000 rehearsals so that you can say yes to the single thing in front of you, to the sip of water, to the sentence you mean, to the face across the table that will only ever look exactly this way once. This isn't an argument for amnesia. The past matters. It binds promises and ripens love. It teaches you which doors are safe to open, and the future is not a trick. Rent is due next week, whether you are enlightened or not. But the way you meet both is decided in this room. If you treat the present only as a hallway to somewhere else, you will miss the only place where tenderness can be offered, where craft can be practiced, where courage can land. There is a discipline to staying, not a rigid stillness, but a soft insistence what is actually happening. The body is a good accomplice. Feel where your feet end and the floor begins. Let a single sound come into focus, a drip, a wing beat, your own breathing learning its slower shape. Sensation pulls you into citizenship. From there, even thought changes. It stops sprinting ahead to interrogate a future that isn't here yet and begins to notice what the moment is asking for. Often it asks for less than you feared, a calm voice instead of a flawless answer, a hand placed on a shoulder instead of a lecture, one page instead of a masterpiece. Ethically, presence is a kind of honesty. It refuses to treat the person in front of you as a prop in yesterday's story or a rehearsal for tomorrow's plan. It lets them be as specific as they are, which is another way of saying it lets them be real. When you attend, judgment loses its favorite shortcuts. You begin to meet details instead of categories. You discover that even the familiar contains strangers if looked at directly. Presence also alters scale. Small things regain their rightful size. A glass of clean water is no longer background. It becomes an event. The person who empties your trash is no longer part of the scenery. They become a life crossing yours right now with a weight you can feel. Gratitude becomes less like a holiday and more like a posture, not spectacular, just accurate. And yet try to hold the present too tightly and it slips. The attempt to nail it down turns it into another task. Mindfulness as performance, calm as a costume. The point is gentler. You don't capture the moment, you stop running past it. You let it find you doing one thing at a time, and you let that one thing be enough to carry meaning. Sometimes presence hurts. In the room with grief, staying feels like standing in cold water. Your habit is to jump to explanations, to plans, to anything with edges. But here, staying is the only kindness large enough. The moment is heavy, and because you do not flee, it can pass through you instead of hardening inside you. There is a relief that only honesty provides. Of course, the room of now is not a chamber you can remain in forever. You blink, and new light is on the wall. A word is spoken and cannot be recalled. The steam rises and disappears. The cup cools. Your pulse counts something, and then counts something else. Even as you attend, the floor is moving, not a betrayal of presence, but its logic. This place is alive precisely because it refuses to stay still. Which means there is a humility built into the practice. You cannot stockpile this hour. You cannot save today's clarity for next month. You can only meet what appears, and then, without asking permission, it will become something it has never been before. You step forward, and the world steps away from what it was, making room for what is becoming. Stand inside that understanding for a breath, and you'll feel the next truth arrive on quiet feet. This patch of time is the only place you can live, and it keeps remaking itself the instant you touch it. Even if you return to the same street at the same time with the same person, the light will fall differently. The air will carry a new rumor. Your own chest will beat with a pattern it has never had before. You can come back. You cannot come back to this. Never step in the same moment twice. You return to a place you know by heart. The path behind the house, the corner cafe, the park bench that understands your weight. It looks the same, but if you pay attention, the sameness thins. The light has taken a different angle. The sound of traffic carries a new tempo. Even the air feels slightly rearranged, as if the room has inhaled and you arrived between breaths. You have come back, yes, but you have not returned to what you left. The moment you remember is already out of reach. We're taught the old river lesson. You can't step into it twice because both you and the water have moved on. The mind nods at the poetry, but keeps acting as if the world were a series of saved files you can reopen. You plan the sequel to a perfect evening. You try to repeat a conversation word for word. You seek the precise feeling a song gave you once and press play as if music were a vending machine. What you meet instead is a sibling of that moment, close enough to recognize, different enough to be its own life. This isn't a failure in the world. It is the world. Time doesn't circle back to original settings. Bodies repair and tire, seasons turn the same crank and still produce new weather. You wake the next day slightly altered by 1,000 micro-experiences that no one could list. Even memory participates in the flow, not as a crystal kept in velvet, but as a glass of water set back on the table, sloshed by the motion of everything else. If this sounds like a thief, it's also a painter. The fact that you can't step into the same moment twice is the same fact that lets anything be alive. Conversation works because words land differently than they did yesterday. Craft deepens because the hands are not the hands of last winter. Relationship breathes because the person across from you is not frozen in last year's pose. Repetition without change would be a machine. You are not one. Still, there's a muscle in the chest that longs for exact returns. When something good happens, we want the recipe. When something painful ends, we want the guarantee it won't return. The ache isn't wrong. It's a wish for rest inside the moving water. But rest here comes not from fixing the current, only from trusting your way of floating. Learning the textures of letting go and letting arrive, again and again, without losing your shape. There's a practice in that, treating reunions as first meetings. You sit at the familiar desk and greet the work like a stranger who might teach you something unexpected. You walk the old street and let your eyes be new eyes. You kiss the person you've kissed 1,000 times and notice what their face is asking for today instead of what it asked for yesterday. This doesn't erase history. It prevents history from suffocating the present with old instructions. We make shrines out of past moments because they helped us live. Nothing wrong with making a room in the mind where gratitude can visit them. The trouble begins when a shrine becomes a border checkpoint and the present has to show papers to get through. You can't force a sunrise to match the one that saved you. You can only stand in this morning's weather and let it offer its unrepeatable help. Even sorrow shifts under this light. Grief is often a long argument with change. Give them back the way they were. Give me back the day before the phone call. But if no 2 hours are the same, then love itself was always a moving river, even when it felt anchored. Grief hurts not only because something is gone, but because the mind keeps reaching for a version of life that no longer exists. The gentler path is to learn the craft of farewell without abandoning what remains, to let memory be a harbor you visit, not an address you try to move back into. Look also at your own interior. The person who made last year's promise is not exactly the person who must keep it now. You owe them respect, and you owe today's truth a hearing. Integrity lives between those two obligations, honoring the direction of the earlier vow while letting the current version of you decide how to fulfill it wisely. Rigid sameness can masquerade as virtue. Sometimes it is just fear of admitting you have changed. Nature models a kinder honesty. The tree at your window is the same tree, conceptually, but its leaves are an entirely different population every year. The sea keeps returning to the shore and never does so in the same pattern. The heart repeats its drumbeat. No two beats are identical. Persistence here means ongoing renewal, not exact replication. Accept that, and the world becomes a classroom instead of a crime scene. There's also relief in this truth when you've made a mistake. If the present is never the same moment twice, then you are not condemned to be the same person in it. Apology is possible because time moves. Repair is possible because you will meet a different hour capable of different choices. The door you closed yesterday might still be closed, but there is a window open today that wasn't open then. Your job is not to teleport back. It is to notice what today makes possible and to step into it with clear hands. Even joy benefits. Trying to pin a good moment to the corkboard flattens it. Letting it pass through while you're awake to it lets it leave a trace that's more durable than hoarding. Capacity. Each time you attend without clinging, your ability to be present grows. Then, when the next good hour arrives, different, uncopyable, you have the strength to taste it fully and the grace to release it when it's done. And yes, the recognition lands tenderly when you turn toward what you cherish most. Nothing you care for will hold still for you, not the house that settles into its foundations, not the city that keeps rewriting its corners, not the person whose laugh you could find in the dark. The river keeps moving through all of it, which sounds like loss, until you notice that this is also how meaning stays alive, through alteration, through growth, through the long, surprising work of becoming. The hands you hold today are not the hands you held before, and that is precisely why holding them matters now, while they are exactly as they are, for as long as they are willing to be held. Everything you love will change. You notice it first in small, almost polite ways. The cup with the hairline crack that catches light differently. The laugh of someone you adore, lower than last year, as if a soft weight has been placed on it. The garden that used to bloom wild and now pauses, reconsidering the calendar. None of it announces itself as a crisis. It simply arrives, like new weather on a familiar street. Then one day you open a drawer and the sweater that always fit does not. Or you pass the shop that held your teenage afternoons and find it emptied to studs, the air inside smelling of dust and saw. Or you look into a face you've known for decades, and a feature you never thought to memorize has drifted, not vanished, just shifted, like furniture in a room you could once walk through in the dark. Love makes maps, time redraws them. Part of you argues with the map maker. Keep it like it was. Let the child remain small enough to lift. Let the friendship remain effortless, the body faithful, the city unchanged by its appetites. You ask the clock for mercy, and the clock keeps its old habit. It moves. You are not wrong to wish. You are human. Wishing is the first language we learn when something precious begins to leave by doing what it has always promised to do, become. We think change steals, but look closely and you can see the other truth. Change is how a thing shows you more of what it is. The tree you love in spring is the same tree making a lantern of itself in autumn. The person you love in laughter is the same person in quiet, revealing rooms of themselves that joy did not open. You do not lose the spring to gain the fall. You are taught a way to love both. Still, the ache is real. Impermanence is not an idea. It is a felt fact. The day you notice your parent searching for a word they once handed you without effort, the morning you realize the house you worked so hard to afford owns more of your time than you hoped it would. The hour when a partnership that has carried you far begins to ask whether carrying is still the right verb. Love expands to hold these hours, or it snaps back to a smaller shape and calls the shrinking safety. There is a tenderness that only shows up when you stop trying to bargain with time. When you stop asking for guarantees and start practicing attention, the ordinary becomes bright at the edges. The way a hand reaches for yours at a crosswalk. The way steam lifts from soup like the soul of winter leaving. The way the dog, slower now, still chooses your feet as a landscape to sleep in. The present does not compensate for the future. It equips you for it. The fear beneath the fear is this: if everything changes, what can be trusted? The answer is not a thing. It is a practice. Tending, checking the anchor lines and adjusting them without resentment. Saying the sentence that keeps a friendship honest, even when your voice shakes. Allowing your own shape to revise so you are not asking others to be the same person forever, just to keep you from meeting your courage. There's a gentler skill, too, letting memory be soft. Hard memory insists that the holiday must taste exactly like it did in 2003, or it isn't real. Soft memory says the recipe can evolve and still carry the signature of a grandmother's hands. Hard memory turns anniversaries into audits. Soft memory turns them into quiet rooms where gratitude can sit without needing to prove anything. Grief, when it comes, and it will, is not an indictment of love. It is the tax love pays for its reach through time. But even grief does not stay itself. It starts sharp, then grows blurred at the edges, then, if tended, becomes a clear water in which the beloved is visible without the rip of panic. You do not get over. You get around, you get through, you get companioned by a new arrangement of absence and presence that words do not cover well. Notice how change also rescues you from your own stagnation. The work you thought defined you loosens its grip, and you find a different craft hiding behind the first. The faith that fit you at 20 invites revision at 40 and becomes deeper for being argued with. The city you swore was the only place you could breathe teaches you that air is made of wider recipes than you knew. Losing one version of a good thing makes room for the next version of goodness, and the awkwardness of that in-between is where courage learns its trade. If you love a child, love their molting, the way languages shed and grow, the way secrets appear, the way distance arrives like a new instrument in the song. If you love a partner, love their seasons, not only the one that flatters your favorite self. If you love your own life, love the revisions, the decisions that will confuse people who prefer you as an early draft. You do not owe anyone the courtesy of remaining legible at the cost of becoming true. At the same time, remember that acceptance is not surrender. You are allowed to fight against diminishment that masquerades as fate. Bodies can be strengthened. Cities can be organized more justly. Relationships can be repaired. Change is not only erosion, it is also growth by design. You participate, you protest, you plant. You become the kind of person time can trust with what it brings next. And when the fear returns, as it will, try this ordinary ritual. Thank what is leaving while it is still here. Not because gratitude will bribe the clock, but because it will keep your hands open enough to feel what you are being given even as you are being asked to release. Hold the mug with the hairline crack and say out loud if you can bear it, "Thank you for being my morning for so long." Hold the hand that is changing in yours, and let your squeeze be the whole speech. In the end, everything you love will change. Yes, and because of that, everything you love can be loved more accurately, not for its illusion of permanence, but for its willingness to be alive in front of you. The river keeps its riverness by flowing, not by freezing. The continuity you seek isn't the opposite of change. It is what change done honestly creates. The line holds not by staying straight, but by bending in the direction of what matters. And that is where we go next, into the strange comfort of seeing transformation not as the break in the story, but as the very thread that ties one chapter to another, again and again across a life. Change as a form of continuity. On the bridge near your home, crews come every few years with scaffolds and tarps. They scrape the old paint until orange dust falls like tired snow. They seal the steel, lay down new color, bolt a plate where rust has chewed. When they leave, the bridge looks refreshed, almost young. It is, of course, not the same bridge as before, and yet it carries you across the same river, holds the same view, gathers the same wind. Maintenance, you realize, isn't an interruption of identity. It's how identity lasts. We're taught to think of continuity as sameness, the museum glass that keeps a thing frozen at its peak. But in the living world, continuity is closer to gardening than glass. Things persist by participating in their own revision, muscles by micro-tears and repair, craft by practice that slowly alters the hands that practice, relationships by conversations that change the people having them. What endures is not the arrangement, it's the commitment to keep arranging. Your body is a quiet manifesto of this. Most of your atoms have rotated in and out since childhood. The blood you carry formed last week. Skin renews. The brain prunes, wires, rewires, and still you wake with a sense of unbroken thread. The thread isn't material. It's pattern, tone of laugh, angle of attention, the way you reach for a cup and somehow always find the handle. Continuity is a rhythm you keep playing while the notes evolve. Listen to a musician warm up. They return to scales, not to repeat a past performance, but to keep a fluent relationship with change. The same phrase played today will not land exactly as it did yesterday. Tempo, mood, and breath alter it, yet the song recognizes itself. That is the shape of a life that lasts without calcifying, revisiting, revising, allowing what's essential to reappear through new arrangements. This reframes our fear of drifting apart from ourselves, from others, from what once mattered. Drifting happens when we try to secure continuity by resisting natural revision. A friendship is not betrayed by becoming deeper or quieter. It is betrayed when we demand it echo a decade-old script. A craft is not lost when you step beyond your early style. It's lost when you refuse to grow and call that loyalty. The paradox is that change, done with care, protects what you love from the brittle fate of imitation. Think of rituals the way a shoreline thinks of waves. The point is not to make each wave identical. It's to keep the meeting between water and land alive. A nightly walk shifts routes with the seasons. The conversation at dinner moves from spelling lists to college forms to the quiet logistics of caring for an elder. The ritual remains because it flexes. Tradition becomes dust when it mistakes its old costume for its heart. Repair is where this becomes visible in the hands. You stitch the elbow of a sweater with a different yarn. You replace a hinge on a door you've closed 1,000 times. You apologize and mean it, not because the original promise failed, but because the promise requires tending to remain true. Kintsugi doesn't hide the crack in the bowl. It traces it in gold to say this is how the bowl continued. Even meaning continues by renewing its context. Home once meant a room and 2 voices. Later it might mean a city and a key alone on a ring. Later still it becomes a hospice bed with a window that catches late afternoon light. The word keeps its center, shelter, belonging, a place the breath understands while the furniture of its life rearranges. Let the rearrangement happen, and you keep the center. Forbid it, and you shrink the word until it can no longer hold you. There is an ethical gentleness in seeing continuity this way. You become more patient with your own pivots. The one who chose a path 5 years ago did so with a different pair of lungs. Honor their direction. Update the route. Integrity is not a refusal to change. It's the art of carrying a value through circumstances that won't stop moving. Courage shifts shape across a life. In one season it's leaving, in the next it's staying, in another it's asking for help you once swore you'd never need. The through line is not the pose, it's the devotion. Relationships breathe by this logic. You do not love the child by insisting they remain a child. You love them by learning their new language at each threshold. You do not love your partner by guarding the early days like a relic. You love them by falling in love with the person they keep becoming and by allowing them to do the same with you. What you protect is not the state but the bond, not the photograph but the willingness to keep showing up for new portraits. This is not passivity. Continuity by change asks for participation. You have to repaint the bridge before the rust wins. You have to have the conversation before silence rewrites the contract. You have to put the instrument in your hands and let today's weather teach your fingers something yesterday couldn't. The world will change regardless. Continuity is choosing the direction of your edits. And when loss comes, the kind you cannot repair into what was, this lens still helps. The person is gone. The river moved beyond the map. Continuity becomes smaller, quieter. A habit of kindness you learned from them that your hands continue. A song they loved that lives not as a duplicate emotion, but as the space you make for remembering. A decision to carry their best thread into rooms they will never enter. Love persists by becoming something it wasn't required to be before. You can test this in an hour. Pick some corner of your life that matters. A room, a routine, a relationship, and make one small, honest change that better serves its heart. Move the chair to where the light actually lands. Ask the question you've been avoiding because you were afraid of changing the shape of the evening. Delete a habit that preserved an image while starving the truth. Then watch how, instead of breaking what you valued, the change protects it. Seen like this, the world becomes less like a series of endings and more like a rope you twist as you walk, adding new fibers as old ones fray. The rope holds not because any single strand lasts forever, but because you keep braiding. Continuity isn't the denial of impermanence, it's a craft for surviving it with coherence and grace. And once you feel that craft in your bones, a different kind of freedom appears at the edge of your vision. When you stop confusing possession with preservation, when you learn that keeping something alive often means letting its form evolve or even leave, your hands loosen. You discover a relief inside release, a spaciousness in not clinging. What you can't keep can still continue through you if you know how to carry it without trying to cage it. Freedom in what you can't keep. Open your hand. Watch how quickly the mind wants to fill it. Keys, a phone, a name tag, proof that you belong where you're headed. We spend years tightening our grip, convinced that security is a function of holding on. But most of what steadies you isn't what you clutch, it's what you're willing to release when the time arrives. Think of closets that once felt essential, shoes for a life you no longer live, boxes of cable and chargers for devices that stopped listening long ago. They sit like small altars to older versions of you, demanding rent and dust. When you finally carry them to the door, something shifts in the room, not just square footage but air. Thought moves differently when the past isn't stacked in the corners pretending to be furniture. The same principle hides in bigger rooms. A job that once fit like a good jacket begins to pinch at the shoulders. You keep adjusting your posture, calling the ache loyalty, until you realize you're guarding a story that stopped telling the truth. Leaving doesn't mean the years inside it were a mistake. It means they did their work. That's how seasons behave. They end when growth would cost them their integrity. Love teaches this most tenderly. You cannot keep a child small enough to carry. You cannot keep a partner exactly at the distance that flatters your favorite self. You cannot keep a friend from becoming quieter, then braver, then someone who needs a different shape of listening. The choice isn't between holding and losing, it's between holding and letting the thing you love remain alive. Release here is not withdrawal. It is participation in the other's becoming. Even your breath is an education in non-possession. Try to hoard and inhale, to store it like savings, and the body panics. Exhale, and the next inhale arrives without begging. You are carried by a rhythm you do not own. Spend an hour paying attention to this, and the world grows less claustrophobic. You learn the taste of sufficiency, enough in, enough out, no need to warehouse what is designed to move. There's an austerity of spirit that mistakes letting go for indifference. It keeps the heart safe by keeping it small. But letting go isn't a refusal to care. It is a way of caring accurately. When you stop wrestling to freeze what wants to flow, your energy returns to tending what is actually here. You fix the hinge instead of resenting the door. You say the apology instead of collecting proof that you were right. You give a gift without tracking the ledger. There is a quiet relief that follows, the relief of not needing the world to be a museum exhibit under your glass. Consider money, the most rehearsed illusion of keeping. We save, wisely, we plan. But the bill in your pocket has already lived 100 lives, and it will live 100 more after your transaction sends it on. Its value is not in hoarding, but in circulation. Food becomes warmth, becomes focus, becomes work with edges you're proud of. Stewardship is not the opposite of freedom. It is its method. You aim what passes through you toward what you believe should grow, and you let it go do that work where you cannot. Letting go also loosens shame's jurisdiction. Shame loves inventory. It asks you to curate a museum of errors and escort visitors through it daily. When you retire as its docent, the exhibits don't vanish. They rejoin time. A mistake becomes material for repair rather than material for self-accusation. You are free not because the past is gone, but because you refuse to be hired by it as a full-time narrator. Sometimes what you can't keep is the version of yourself that once kept you safe. The performer who earned belonging by excellence. The diplomat who kept peace by swallowing their own voice. The skeptic who avoided disappointment by staying 5 steps away from hope. Thank them. They worked. Then let them go on sabbatical. A different shape of courage is needed now. Freedom in what you can't keep is not a philosophy you admire from a distance. It's a craft in the hands. You practice with small rehearsals, deleting an email you're writing only to win, giving away an object that tugs your attention toward a life you've outgrown, pausing before you answer, so a new sentence has a chance. Each release is tiny and specific. Together they become a posture, the way shoulders learn to lower when you walk into a room that doesn't require armor. The paradox is that you come to feel more stable precisely because fewer things have to stay the same for you to be okay. Your identity becomes portable. Your gratitude no longer depends on a particular chair, view, or calendar. You can take joy like a traveler takes light, a bag that fits under any seat. The world doesn't owe you your preferred arrangement to be worthy of your full presence. This isn't a renunciation of responsibility. You still keep your word. Pay your bills, show up when you said you would. Letting go isn't breaking promises. It's refusing to make promises to permanence that the world cannot keep. You trade the fantasy of control for the real influence of attention. And attention, freed from clutching, is a strong architect. It can build rooms where people breathe easier. You can test it now. Think of one thing you've been holding past its kindness. An object, a schedule, a resentment, a role, and imagine loosening your hand a fraction, not abandoning, just loosening. Feel the space that opens, the thought that enters, the curiosity that follows. That's the contour of freedom, available inside impermanence, not an escape hatch, but a wider hallway through the same house. And once you've tasted that hallway, another truth becomes visible. Letting go isn't only a permission, it's a form of strength. It takes power to release what flatters you but doesn't serve you anymore, to ease your grip when fear says squeeze, to bless a departure without poisoning the door. What looks like surrender from a distance, up close has the steady posture of someone choosing where their life will flow next. Letting go is a form of power. You stand at a threshold with your hand on a door that used to open easily. The key still turns, but something in you doesn't, not out of weakness, out of accuracy. The room beyond held you once. It taught you. Now it asks for a shape you can no longer wear. You could force your way in, recite the old lines, call the strain commitment, or you could do the quieter, braver thing, take your hand off the knob and bless the door from the hallway. Power looks different up close. We often confuse clutching with strength. Grip tight enough, the logic goes, and the world will obey. But a clenched fist can't take the next hand. A rigid plan can't turn when the road bends. So much of real power is the ability to release without collapsing, to choose where your energy flows instead of being recruited by fear into guarding what no longer serves you. Letting go is not a single gesture. It's a family of practices. There is the release that ends a harmful loop, stepping out of a role that kept your mouth shut, retiring the reflex to fix what cannot be fixed, declining an argument that only ever wins silence. There is the letting go that makes room, clearing a shelf, a schedule, a habit, so a truer priority has light. And there is the hardest kind, the release that honors what was good by not trapping it in a museum. You stop insisting that a friendship be what it was, and in that honest space, a different kind of closeness can appear, or a gentle distance that asks for blessing rather than blame. Consider the power of refusal. You don't answer the message baiting you into a performance of outrage. You don't accept the extra work that flatters your competence while hollowing your days. You don't rehearse the grievance that keeps scoring points against a person you no longer are. Each no is a valve turning, pressure leaving. You are not emptying your life. You are depressurizing it so the lungs of your attention can expand. Or think of forgiveness in its plain clothes. Not absolving harm, not inviting repetition, but setting down the anchor of the story where you are always the one dragging a weight. You let the past be a continent you visited. Beautiful, dangerous, instructive, and you stop carrying it like luggage through every airport of the present. The power here is mobility. You get to walk at your current speed. Letting go changes posture. The shoulders lower, the breath lengthens, the voice doesn't rise to prove anything. You're not less committed. You're more precise about what deserves commitment. Precision is a kind of strength that doesn't need applause. It plants a smaller, truer garden and tends it deeply. It keeps promises to values rather than to appearances. Of course, release can be mistaken for surrender in the worst sense, the shrinking kind. That's not what we're naming. Shrinking says, I can't. Letting go says, I won't spend the finite coin of this hour where it buys nothing real. Shrinking hides. Letting go steps into view without armor and chooses a direction. Shrinking leaves a vacuum. Letting go makes room and then fills it with a deliberate act. The honest conversation, the craft resumed, the walk taken instead of the doom scroll. Power also lives in timing. Hold too long and you sour the thing you mean to preserve. Drop too soon and you miss its last lesson. Wisdom is learning to listen for the hinge click, the subtle sound that says an era is closing of its own accord. You can feel it in a tone that keeps arriving between two people who love each other but can't quite keep pretending, in a task you keep postponing because your hands are already halfway to a different instrument, in the body's quiet revolt against a calendar arranged like a punishment. Hear the hinge and you can leave by the door instead of the wall. Sometimes the letting go is of an image, the self who is always composed, always useful, always strong in the same way. Power grows strange and generous when you allow new shapes of strength to appear, asking for help, naming grief, refusing to hustle for worth. You discover that dignity doesn't come from holding a pose, it comes from staying loyal to your aliveness as it changes. There's a ritual you can try that takes 2 minutes and reorders more than you expect. Sit with one object you've kept past its kindness, an award, a shirt, a stack of papers that represents a version of you you're done auditioning for. Thank it out loud for what it gave. Then release it, donate, recycle, discard. Notice what returns in the space. a thought that was waiting for air, a feeling that no longer has to push through clutter, a plan that didn't fit until now. This is not minimalism as performance, it's sovereignty returning to your hour. Letting go doesn't only free you, it frees others from serving a story you outgrew. When you stop needing someone to be your rescue, they're allowed to be your companion. When you stop demanding that a team prove your importance, they get back the oxygen to do the work that matters. The paradox is that your influence often expands when your grip loosens. You become easier to align with because you're not using people as scaffolding for a collapsing monument. And yes, sometimes the release is simply the exhale you've been postponing. You put down a day that cannot be fixed into excellence, and you call it done. You let tonight be ordinary and discover that rest builds a strength you cannot manufacture with one more push. The engine of becoming runs on a rhythm, effort and ease, and power is knowing when to give each its turn. What does all this prepare you for? A different relationship to incompleteness. Letting go is a vote of confidence in a future you cannot yet specify. It says, I trust the unfinished bridge enough to step, plank by plank, without dragging the entire scaffolding of the past across the river. It says, I will not spend my life maintaining versions of me or of us that time has already asked to soften. Because what remains after release is not a lack, it is a living outline, a shape with room to grow. And there is a peculiar beauty in that open edge, the grace of a work still in progress, a sentence not yet forced to its period, a life mid-sculpt, generous with shavings on the floor. That is where we're headed next, into the quiet relief of being unfinished, and how leaving some edges unsealed can make a home more habitable for the person you are still becoming. The beauty of being unfinished. A room half-painted has a different kind of light. The new color climbs the wall and stops shoulder high, a clean horizon where roller marks dry to a soft skin. Tape flutters at the edge of a window. On the floor, a tray, a brush, a shoe print you'll wipe later. You can smell the future in the air and still see the past along the ceiling. For a few hours, the room belongs to neither, and that in-between feels strangely alive. We are taught to hide such moments. Show the final draft, not the notebook with its crossings out. Plate the cake. Don't photograph the batter. Speak when a thought is polished, not when it is still finding its verbs. But the world we actually live in is closer to the wet edge of paint than to museum glass. The bread is always rising or cooling. The garden is always between seasons. Even your own voice is a work site, scaffolding tucked just out of frame while you try new beams for strength. To love what is unfinished is not laziness, it's fidelity to reality. The opposite posture, perfection, punishes aliveness. It confuses accuracy with rigidity and turns making into a courtroom. It keeps you from starting because the first page can't compete with an imaginary 12th. It keeps you from sharing because the draft might be judged by a jury that lives rent-free in your head. It keeps you from learning because learning requires the indignity of getting it wrong in public and surviving. Unfinished things. Breathe. A conversation left open by a good question invites another evening. A melody with a deliberate pause lets the listener write their own line in the silence. A room with one bare wall asks for a chair you would not have noticed if everything were already complete. Completion is not the enemy, but it isn't the only form of beauty. Sometimes the elegance is in the seam you can see, the brushstroke that didn't fully disappear, the clay thumbprint that says a human hand passed here and didn't pretend otherwise. There is a tenderness that comes with this way of seeing. You stop demanding that the people you love speak in finished sentences. You let a friend be mid-becoming without pressing them for a thesis. You forgive your own hesitations and call them versions rather than failures. A relationship that allows revision becomes sturdier than one that relies on pose. It can flex without cracking because neither person is auditioning for a role they hope will be stamped final. Craft deepens under this light. You return to scales, to sketches, to studies, not because you worship practice, but because you understand that the point is to stay in conversation with the work. You let yourself leave a problem partially solved at the end of the day so that tomorrow has a handhold. You resist the false urgency that treats every hour like a verdict. The rhythm of good making looks less like a parade and more like tides. Approach, retreat, return with a better eye. Even ethics grows kinder in the presence of incompletion. We are quick to cancel people as if character were a product on a shelf rather than a discipline under construction. But if you admit your own half-built beams, judgment softens into discernment. Accountability remains. The scaffolding must be checked, yet it is paired with the faith that repair is part of the design. Kintsugi taught us this once. The crack is not erased, it is traced, and the tracing becomes part of the bowl's dignity. There is also relief here, a loosening of the jaw. The house doesn't have to be perfect before company comes. The poem can arrive in fragments that only learn their order by being spoken aloud. Dinner can be simple, love can be awkward, and still accurate. You stop waiting to become the final version of yourself before letting yourself be seen. You let today's competence be enough for today's task, and let tomorrow's improvements belong to tomorrow's hands. And yet loving the unfinished doesn't excuse neglect. Wet paint needs tending or dust will tattoo itself into the wall. A draft needs returning, not indefinite display as a promise of genius to come. The beauty is in the attention you give while a thing is mid-becoming, wiping the rim of the bowl, cleaning the brush, tightening a single sentence until it clicks. Unfinished is not an alibi. It's an invitation to honest care. Try this small practice. Leave one margin wider than usual, a literal one on a page, a strip of time between meetings, a few feet of empty floor where a chair might go someday. Then inhabit the margin. See what appears when you're not crowding the hour with proof of your worth. Often it's the sentence that didn't fit when the page was tight, the idea that needed a gentler pace, the small joy you were too efficient to notice. The mind works better with room, so does love. The grace of incompletion is that it keeps the door open for others. If you present only finished monuments, people visit as tourists. If you show a living workshop, they roll up their sleeves. Someone's suggestion improves your joinery. Someone's story changes the ending you were forcing. Someone's patience steadies your hands. Unfinished spaces are hospitable. They make room for a we. Of course, there is a shadow here that honesty must name. Some projects will remain incomplete because time runs out. Some letters will never be answered. Some reconciliations will not find their day. You will leave shelves half-built and ideas half-sung. At first, that feels like a failure. Then, if you keep looking, it begins to look like the way lives actually pass their wisdom forward, fragments that invite continuation, tools left where another hand might find them, a sentence that breaks so someone else can finish it in their own mouth. This is the quiet generosity of being unfinished. It frees you from the fantasy of total authorship. You become a link, not a monument. A builder who knows that even the best work will weather, be repainted, be taken down to make room for something that answers a need you cannot yet see. The brush dries, the room airs, the tape comes off. For a time it is beautiful to you. Later someone will wonder who chose this color. Later still, no one will ask. And there beneath the relief and the humility, another truth waits with its light switched off. If we are all works in progress, if even our most careful lines fade, then the day will come when not just our projects, but our names slip out of common reach. The wet edge will dry. The fingerprints will blur. What, then, is the worth of all this careful tending? The answer does not arrive as a headline. It arrives as a quiet room, a morning, an ordinary breath, and the recognition that meaning doesn't require permanent labels to have been real while it lived. You will be forgotten. Somewhere, a headstone has lost its name to the weather. The letters softened, then blurred, then disappeared into the stone's own grain. For a time, someone still knew who lay there and traced the vanished vowels with a finger. Then they too left. The stone remains, but the story has been folded back into the ground. We resist this thought as if it were an insult, but it's just a description on a long time scale. Names fade. Photos bleach. Diaries go unread. Libraries clear shelf space for the living. Even the monuments we build to resist forgetting are made of materials that have their own schedules of crumbling. The most durable archive is still only a delay. The mind tries to negotiate. What about digital memory, the infinite obituary of the internet? Servers are machines with power cords and budgets. Fashions and platforms change. Formats rot like fruit in a bowl. One day the link goes dark and the thread unravels without ceremony. Your pixels, too, are on loan. At first, this can feel like an erasure of meaning. If the self disappears from the record, if even the most careful work is eventually anonymous, what is the point? The old answer, whispered by fear, is to build bigger inscriptions, more achievement, more audience, more proof that you were here. But proof is not presence. You've met people with a small public footprint whose lives still warmed the room. You've met people celebrated widely who rarely arrived anywhere with their heart. Being forgotten is not a judgment. It's a property of living in a world that keeps moving. And inside that truth hides a gentler invitation to shift your attention from credit to contribution, from the permanence of your name to the depth of your effect while you are able to offer it. The acts that outlive you rarely remember who performed them. A bridge stands, fewer people drown. A law changes, more people breathe. A kindness reroutes a life that reroutes three others. The chain travels without tagging each link. There is a relief available here if you let it in. You are freed from the exhausting task of curating your legend. You can stop polishing every hour for its future photograph. You can trade the theater of importance for the practice of importance, showing up fully where you stand, doing the smaller, truer thing that may never be seen beyond the circle it feeds. Quietly, the pressure to be exceptional slides off. You are allowed to be specific instead. Humility, then, is not a posture but an accurate map. It says, I am a brief caretaker of this breath, this body, this corner of the human project. I did not begin the work, and I will not finish it. I can make my patch more hospitable while I am here. I can repair a hinge, amend a sentence, hold a hand, plant a tree whose shade will not know my name. What a strange and sturdy joy to participate without owning. This clarity also cleans the motives of what you keep. Reputation becomes lighter when you know it will not last. Kindness becomes heavier when you sense how quickly the chance to offer it can vanish. You give apologies faster, praise more readily, patience more often, because hoarding these things for a grand later scene makes less sense in a life that dissolves into other lives. The question shifts from how will I be remembered to what will be different because I was here today. To accept forgetting does not mean neglecting memory. Remember while you can. It is one of the ways love pays attention. Speak the names at dinner. Teach the stories to those who want to carry them, but let memory be local and alive rather than frozen into self-defense. When remembrance becomes a way to keep the past from changing, it turns brittle. When it becomes a way to honor what formed you and to form others in turn, it stays soft enough to pass from hand to hand. Anonymity is not emptiness. If you have ever felt your life steadied by a stranger, a nurse in a hallway, a writer whose sentence found you at the right hour, a gardener whose city tree threw shade across your grief, you have benefited from people you could not name on your best day. Most of what keeps us alive is unsigned. And what of love? Does it vanish when the last person who knew you is gone? Not exactly. Love is a pattern that travels through hosts. It changes hands, changes dialects, survives by inhabiting new lives. The laugh you carry from your grandfather finds its way into a friend who never met him. The patience your teacher practiced toward you appears years later in your kitchen, and someone you love thinks it was yours all along. Attribution falls away. The current remains. There is, of course, a tenderness in this acceptance. It asks you to let go of being the center without letting go of being awake. It asks you to labor for outcomes you will not witness and to plant in seasons whose harvest will feed other mouths. It asks you to measure meaning by fidelity rather than fame. But the trade is fair. In return, you get your hours back. You get to meet the day without casting it for a part in your biography. You get to make a home in the present tense, which is the only tense a life can occupy. Stand at a window tonight and notice how quickly the light forgets the shapes it just made on your wall. Notice how the street carries yesterday away without asking your permission. Then notice the smaller truth inside the large one. You are here now. Someone's hour is softer because of you. A task is better tended. A hurt has begun to close. No inscription required. There is one more way to hear this thought, less like a verdict and more like a frame. If the world will eventually set your name down, then your time has edges. Edges focus. They give a page its shape. The fact that you will be forgotten is not the bleak end of the story. It is the boundary line that lets meaning concentrate. Within that boundary, choices matter with a clarity they would not have in an endless afternoon. Which is to say, forgetting is the distant weather that makes the local season precious, and that points us toward the next question, waiting at the threshold, how the knowledge of an ending doesn't hollow life out, but carves it into a form strong enough to be lived. Mortality gives life its shape. A doctor points to a calendar, taps a date, and the room changes temperature. Nothing in the body has shifted in that instant, but the day acquires edges you can feel with your hands. A season, once a vague sweep of weather, becomes a countable number of mornings. The same stairs you've climbed 1,000 times carry a different weight because you are suddenly aware of how many climbs remain. It isn't that time just began. It's that the frame came into view. Edges don't only limit, they give form. A bowl holds water precisely because it ends. Music becomes music because notes are bound by rests. A page is writable because it isn't infinite. Its finitude invites a sentence to decide its shape. Mortality works like that for a life. The boundary is not a cruelty pasted onto meaning. It is the condition that concentrates it without an ending. The urgency to choose thins out. With endless tomorrows, love can be postponed, apologies drafted forever, courage negotiated into later. A limit makes a line, and a line can guide a hand. This is not to romanticize loss. The knowledge that we and those we love will end does not simply clarify. It wounds. Grief isn't a lesson plan. It's a weather system. Yet even inside that weather, the outline of life grows clearer. You begin to feel the difference between what is essential and what merely performs importance. You notice how much of your calendar exists to reassure an imagined audience. You start exchanging displays for decisions. Call the person today, say the unsaid sentence, put the small coin of an hour where it will matter to someone who can feel it. Finitude sharpens ethics. If a day can be squandered, then a day can also be kept. Attention becomes a moral act. You start asking your minutes, not, how do you promote me, but whom do you feed? Mortality turns time from an abstract background into a material you work with, like wood or clay. You learn the craft of shaping it. Setting a door in an afternoon and letting other noise live outside that threshold until tomorrow. Strangely, the discipline makes the day feel larger, not smaller. It stops leaking. Imagine the opposite, a life without end. At first it sounds like freedom, time to master every art, make every amends, wander every coastline. Then the fabric of meaning begins to fray. If every promise can be deferred, what is a promise? If every meeting can be rescheduled to a century from now, how do you ever really arrive? Without an edge, desire loses its contour. Curiosity drowns in abundance. Death is a thief, but immortality risks becoming a dissolver. The ending lends grain to the wood. Your hand can grip it. Mortality also softens the posture of certainty. Knowing our span is limited makes it harder to hold others in contempt for not sharing our pace or our map. You become humbler about your judgments, quicker to give the benefit of the doubt, because you're aware that everyone is carrying a countdown you cannot see. The stranger in line is not an obstacle, but another brief life negotiating the same narrow hallway. Compassion, too, is a form carved by finitude. There's courage hiding in this clarity. When you remember the clock, you stop auditioning for eternity and begin participating in history. You take the risk that current love requires instead of waiting for a perfect safety that never arrives. You begin projects whose completion you won't witness because the work's worth isn't tied to your signature. Planting a tree is a conversation with the future you will not attend. Mortality makes the conversation honest and generous. Rituals deepen under this light. You light a candle, not because candles change the universe, but because the flame draws a circle around the next 20 minutes and says, within this boundary we pay attention. You hold a hand a beat longer because there are only so many beats left to give. You forgive faster, not to erase justice, but because vengeance is a poor use of a dwindling fire. Gratitude stops being a performance and becomes a habit of accurate seeing. This bread, this voice, this sky through this exact window, once and never again in precisely this way. Even ambition can be rescued by the boundary. The point isn't to accomplish everything. It's to do the right things at a depth that changes texture, not just headlines. Mortality edits the list. Some goals fall away because they were borrowed from the circus. The ones that remain become sturdier, making a home kinder, learning a craft well enough to teach its patience, becoming the sort of presence other people can think beside without fear. If this all sounds solemn, notice the joy that sneaks in when the clock is welcomed rather than denied. Food tastes sharper when you stop eating while rehearsing tomorrow's arguments. Conversation brightens when you surrender the urge to convert it into a proof of your biography. Laughter rings differently when you let it be an unrepeatable event instead of a clip for later praise. Pleasure doesn't have to be hoarded to be real. Mortality lets it be vivid right now. In the end, the frame does what frames do. It makes the picture visible. Your days do not throb with meaning because they are many. They throb because they are numbered. The knowledge bends your life toward essence, a focusing not just on what you achieve, but on what your presence catalyzes while you are here. The measure becomes less about duration and more about ignition. What lights did your hours light in other rooms? What did your finite attention wake in a friend? A street, a field of work, a child's trust, a stranger's afternoon. Which is to say, the boundary of a life is not only a line you approach, it is a lens you can look through. Seen that way, the question that follows arrives softly and with purpose. If time's edge gives your days their shape, perhaps the truest way to read a life is not by how long it stretched, but by what it awakened while it burned. A life measured by what it awakens. In a dark hall, one person claps first, not loudly, just enough to pierce the hush. A second joins, then a third, and the applause becomes weather. The performer hasn't changed in those few beats. The room has. Something that was sleeping wakes, and the waking spreads farther than any single hand could reach. We're taught to count lives by what they gather: titles, followers, rooms with your name on the door. But watch how quietly influence travels when you stop treating yourself as a container and start acting like a match. A match keeps nothing. It gives a small flame that allows other flames. The room brightens, and no one can quite point to the origin without missing the point. What exactly does a life awaken? Sometimes it's courage. You speak at a volume that tells the shy sentence beside you it may speak too. You refuse to laugh at a cruelty, and suddenly 3 others decide they don't need to either. Sometimes it's precision. Your craft teaches a steadiness of hand that makes a younger person's hands less afraid to begin. Sometimes it's attention. You point at the sky over a grocery store parking lot, and someone starts seeing weather as art. The awakening doesn't make them you. It makes them more fully themselves. There is a physics to this. Moods synchronize like metronomes on a shared board. Tuning forks hum to neighboring tones. The organism copies what looks alive. You don't have to be important for this to work. You have to be vivid at the point of contact, present enough that the air around you learns a different rhythm. Vividness isn't performance. It's accuracy with your hour. Notice the forms awakening can take. Sometimes you add heat, a sentence that burns clean, a risk taken in public that licenses others to leave their safe shadows. Sometimes you remove noise, you listen so steadily that another person's tangled thought can find its thread. Sometimes you draw a boundary and, as odd as it sounds, your refusal gives other people permission to protect their time. Waking isn't always a trumpet. Often it's a hand resting, finally, on the right switch. There are dangers here. Awakening is not converting people to your shape. It's not collecting disciples or arranging a chorus to sing your song in unison. It's arranging conditions in which other beings can sense their own latent frequency and step toward it. That means offering questions, not scripts. It means leaving doors ajar rather than dragging people through them. It means trusting that the thing rising in someone else may not flatter your ego, and learning to bless that anyway. This measure, what your presence catalyzes, rescues ambition from spectacle. You don't have to make the headline bend. You have to make a corner of the day less afraid, less numb, less alone. A nurse adjusts a pillow, and a stranger sleeps. A coder fixes a tiny bug no one will thank them for, and a map loads for someone late to an interview. A neighbor keeps a spare key, and a disaster becomes an inconvenience. None of these acts can be worn like jewelry. All of them wake ease in a body that would have carried tension otherwise. If you must keep score, keep it locally. Who thinks more clearly after sitting with you? Which room argues more honestly because you refuse to turn disagreement into a performance? What skill became less mysterious because you taught it with your hands, not your superiority? What habit in yourself, impatience, self-importance, the addiction to being right, fell quiet enough that another person could breathe? A life that awakens is not a series of fireworks. It's a steady weather system where growth becomes thinkable. This metric also subverts perfectionism. You don't need to be finished to be generative. The half-built bridge lets someone else see how bridges are made. The apology delivered in imperfect language teaches a household that repair outranks eloquence. The small practice you keep, even on bad days, wakes the idea that discipline can be gentle. People rarely awaken in the presence of your polish. They awaken in the presence of your sincerity. It asks something of your attention. To awaken courage, you need to notice where fear hides and speak to it softly without shaming it. To awaken curiosity, you must be curious. Ask another question when your pride wants to summarize. To awaken generosity, give first in places that feel safe to you and slowly widen the circle. Awakening is cumulative. It's how forest floors turn sunlight into 1,000 forms of green. You won't always see the ripple. The email you answered with patience becomes a calmer dinner in a home you will never enter. The boundary you set with grace becomes someone else's template 2 years from now. The book you pressed into a friend's hand waits on a shelf until their hardest night. At 2 in the morning, a paragraph finds them, and they keep going. Measurement here is mostly faith, but faith is not fantasy. It's a practiced guess sustained by many small proofs. When the day ends, ask a kinder question than the resume expects. What woke because I was here? Not what adored me, not what proved me, not what envied me. What woke? If the answer is small, good. Small is honest. Small, repeated, becomes climate. And on the mornings when you have nothing grand to offer, you can still be useful. Make the coffee. Untangle the cord. Say, take your time. Let the dog lick your wrist before you check the news. Quiet your own storm enough that the weather around you steadies by a degree. Awakening lives in these modest calibrations more than in any thunderous speech. There is a side effect worth naming. When you aim your life this way, the world grows less adversarial. People become collaborators in the same experiment rather than obstacles to your story. You are less measurable by trophies and more by tenderness, less by how towering you stand and more by how many stood taller because you didn't need to. The ego finds this unsatisfying at first. The soul finds it breathable. Some might call this softness. It isn't. It is a way of carrying power that doesn't harden the hand holding it. It protects you from the bitterness that comes from hustling for applause, and it keeps your hours from being spent on theatrics that never feed anyone. It turns goodness from a performance into a practical technology you can apply even on your worst day. And if you listen, you'll hear the next step in this logic arriving on quiet feet. The simplest awakening often begins with the gentlest gesture, a habit of treatment that steadies both sides at once. Not as a saintly sacrifice, but as an instinct for survival that keeps your own mind clear while making the ground safer for others. A soft shield you can carry everywhere, even into the rooms that have not learned to be kind yet. Kindness as self-protection. The first time you decide not to clap back, it feels like giving up ground. Your tongue is ready with the better insult, the perfectly weighted rebuttal, the email that would win the little war. You can feel the heat rising, the body marshaling its small army. Then, for reasons you can't entirely explain, you take a breath and choose something steadier. You answer plainly. You decline to escalate. You sign your name without the extra barb. The moment passes, and later that evening, you notice a quiet you didn't know you'd purchased. Your mind is not hosting the argument anymore. We mistake kindness for charity, as if it were something you give away at cost to yourself. But kindness, rightly understood, is a form of self-protection. It lowers the temperature in rooms where your nervous system would otherwise spend the next 12 hours mopping up adrenaline. It keeps your attention from being rented by resentment. It lets you sleep without reopening the case file at 3 in the morning to cross-examine ghosts. Think of your day as a body of water. Unkindness is a motorboat carving, wakes that slam back against your own shore long after the boat has disappeared. Kindness is the decision to row. It's slower, it's not showy, but your shoreline holds. The dock doesn't splinter. The water stays clear enough that you can see the small life under the surface, the thought that needed calm to arrive, the idea that would have drowned in churn. This is not niceness. Niceness is a costume you wear to avoid conflict. Kindness includes a spine. It says no without venom, sets a boundary without theater, leaves a conversation that keeps bleeding into the same wound. It makes eye contact with harm and refuses to mirror it. Where niceness placates, kindness chooses. The choosing is the shield. When you decide your values in advance, dignity, clarity, proportion, you don't have to borrow your opponent's posture to feel strong. You get to be the temperature in the room rather than a thermometer wildly reporting. Consider the emails that want to colonize your mood. A short, steady reply with a clear next step protects an entire afternoon of attention. Consider the driver who cuts too close and looks in the mirror expecting rage. Let your hands stay at 10 and 2. Let the breath exit without a story about winning. Consider the small humiliations that stack up in ordinary places. The cashier who seems curt, the colleague who shares your idea in their own voice. Kindness here doesn't sanctify disrespect. It refuses to rehearse it in your body after the scene ends. You keep your hours from becoming a courtroom where you argue toward an unachievable verdict. Kindness is also practical. It lowers the cost of repair. When you speak gently, while you're angry, not avoidant, not passive, just unwilling to scorch, you leave the bridge standing for tomorrow's crossing. When you argue fairly, you reduce the debris you'll have to sweep before you can speak again. Cruelty buys a hot minute and sends you the invoice for months. Kindness pays as it goes. Protection shows up, too, in how kindness secures your identity. Without it, you're a mirror held up to whatever comes near. You reflect panic, pettiness, swagger, contempt. With it, you remain legible to yourself. You get to keep recognizing your own face. You can walk past a window and not wince at the person who would have enjoyed the cutting line more than the truthful one. Kindness holds you to the person you'd like to trust when the wind is up. None of this asks you to be a doormat. A boundary delivered kindly is still a boundary. I won't stay in this conversation if you keep raising your voice. I can't take on that work. I'm ending this here. The firmness is part of the care. It protects both sides from the corrosion that follows vague resentments. Kindness without boundary becomes a leaky container. Boundary without kindness becomes a wall. Together they're a door with a working lock and a welcome mat. Clear, humane, usable. Even gossip has a way of charging rent on your calm. It feels like belonging, then leaves your mind buzzing with the powder of other people's mistakes. Kindness is the decision to spare yourself the hangover. You redirect the talk. You decline the punchline that cost someone else their dignity. You choose not to be a storage unit for cruelty disguised as wit. Later, when you are alone, your head is a room you want to re-enter. There is a physiological gentleness in all this. The body listens to how we speak. If you keep choosing words that don't slice, your jaw unclenches. If you keep letting someone else's storm pass without anchoring it to your ribs, your shoulders lower. The nervous system learns there is danger and there is discomfort. Not all discomfort is danger. Kindness teaches that distinction better than any mantra. It keeps you from exhausting yourself by treating every disagreement like a house fire. Kindness to yourself is the same practice turned inward. The day goes badly, and you resist the old habit of calling yourself names to prove you understand the failure. You correct without scolding. You apologize to yourself for the hour you burned and begin again like a craftsman who knows the work will require many quiet returns. You discover that inner cruelty never once improved your aim. It only shook your hands. And yes, the world contains people who will pocket your gentleness as if it were weakness. This is where kindness as self-protection sharpens. You don't argue with the pattern. You step out of its reach. You stop auditioning for their approval, which is a kind of freedom a small God cannot grant. You deploy the simplest sentence in the language of sovereignty. This isn't for me. Then you go where your care isn't squandered. A final, quieter advantage. Kindness keeps your sight clean. When you refuse to smear the glass with contempt, you can see the scene you're in with more accuracy, the fear under bluster, the hunger under bravado, the confusion under speed. Kindness preserves your ability to perceive, and perception is safety. You are less likely to be surprised by the obvious when you haven't spent the day fogging your own window. Walk through your hours tomorrow with this small experiment. Treat kindness not as a virtue you perform for applause, but as equipment. Put it on like weather gear. Let it turn sharp rain into ordinary sound on a roof. Speak plainly. Decline bait. Set the lock. Offer the hand you can afford, then keep walking with your pockets unpicked by rage. Notice by night how much of you is still available for the people and work that deserve you. And as you practice, something else becomes unmistakable. The shield you carry is made from the simplest recognition that other people bleed the way you do, flinch the way you do, wake at 3 the way you do. Kindness protects you by insisting on that reality. It keeps your gloves off the glass long enough to see what's there. Not obstacles, not extras in your plot, but lives as thick with rooms and weather as your own. Others exist as fully as you do. You pause at a red light and glance at the car beside you. A woman in a blue coat is tapping the steering wheel, eyes far away. For a second, she's just a shape in your periphery. Then the mind does its old trick. It remembers that behind that windshield is a whole interior, rooms of memory, a private inventory of fears and plans, an entire weather system you will never forecast. The light turns green. You both move. Her life keeps widening beyond the frame of your glance. Most days, we treat other people like scenery for our minutes. Useful, obstructing, pleasant, irritating, adjectives pinned to moving bodies. It's efficient for getting through errands. It's costly for being human. Because the truth is as ordinary as it is dizzying. Each person you pass houses as many stories, contradictions, losses, and bright threads as you do. Their childhoods are still echoing. Their shoulders are carrying deadlines you can't see. Their laughter means more than the sound it made in your direction. To recognize this is to step out of the tiny kingdom where your narrative reigns and into a city of equal skies. The mind resists. Full recognition slows everything down. It complicates blame and blurs the clean lines of your favorite judgments. It asks you to consider traffic not only as an obstacle, but as a chorus of urgencies equal to your own. It asks you to hear a short email as the product of someone else's crowded day rather than a verdict on your worth. It asks you, in the hardest moments, to admit that another person's mistake is not a story about your value, but a story about the limits of being alive. Look closely, and the evidence keeps arriving. The quiet kid's notebook is full of galaxies. The stern manager at 3 p.m. becomes softness at 8 p.m., reading on a couch with a lamp like a small moon. The neighbor you decided was aloof is caring for a parent who wakes at odd hours, which is why the trash goes out at midnight. Even the person who hurt you without excusing a thing has a map of reasons that does not absolve but explains. Seeing this doesn't erase justice, it refines its aim. It keeps you from swinging wildly and calling it righteousness. Social distance shrinks without anyone moving an inch when you let this fullness in. Your sentences change shape. You ask one more question and interrupt one fewer time. You leave a longer silence and discover that silence is not emptiness, it's room. You apologize sooner because another person's dignity feels less like a concept and more like a fragile, specific thing you could accidentally dent with a fast word. You argue better because you stop treating disagreement as an insult and start treating it as two dense lives trying to trade maps through a keyhole. This way of seeing travels into how you design the small structures around you. You write instructions as if the reader is tired. You schedule meetings as if someone is caring for a body that hurts. You create policies that assume people have lives, not just roles. You leave the last piece of fruit on the plate because you can imagine the person whose day will tilt toward okay because they found it. None of this is spectacular. It's ordinary hospitality extended beyond your front door. There is a tenderness, too, in realizing how often you miscast the extras in your private movie. The cashier's flat tone that you took personally was a migraine. The friend's late reply was an hour of crying in a parked car. The partner's distance was not indifference, but worry they didn't yet know how to speak. Once you admit how wrong you can be about others, you become kinder to the ways they are wrong about you. Not resigned, just less theatrical in your hurt. Seeing others as full doesn't mean surrendering your boundaries. In fact, it makes them cleaner. You can say no without contempt because you're not denying someone's humanity. You're honoring your own. You can step out of a harmful pattern without needing to demonize the person inside it. You can ask for what you need without turning it into a trial. Respect for their depth includes respect for yours. Let this recognition protect you from the cheapest temptations. Cynicism flattens people into types. You'll feel clever for a minute and lonely for hours. Contempt turns strangers into furniture. It will make you efficient and then quietly sick. Even praise can erase when it turns a person into an idea you prefer to the complicated creature in front of you. The antidote is not constant sentimentality. It's accuracy. It's letting the full weight of other minds register on your scales. Practice can be small. On the train, pick one person and imagine a sentence you might be grateful to hear if you were them today. In conversation, let your first follow-up question be about a detail that indicates you believe their life is as layered as yours. When anger spikes, add this line to the script: they are as inside their story as I am inside mine. Not to mute the anger, only to keep it from mislabeling the target. Some days you won't manage any of this. You'll turn others into obstacles or audiences because you're tired and the world is loud. Forgive yourself, then try again. The point isn't perfection, it's direction. Each attempt makes the street more livable for everyone, including you. Your own mind grows roomier when you stop building walls around your experience, as if it were the only climate that counts. And when this way of seeing begins to settle into your bones, a different kind of responsibility appears. If other people are as real as you are, if their nights feel as long, their hopes as precise, then the way you move through rooms matters in a new currency. Not only as strategy, not only as performance, but as a kind of moral accounting that balances in quiet places, what you do when no one is watching, how you treat a voice with no leverage, whether your private choices match your public face. You start to understand that the true riches in a life aren't stored in what you own of others' attention, but in the steadiness of the person you are when you meet another whole world at arm's length. Integrity as the truest wealth. You find a wallet in the quiet part of the evening. No one around, a thin wind, a street lamp humming like a tired insect. Inside a few notes, a card with a name, a photograph with the edges softened by years in a pocket. You could close the leather and keep walking. No witness, no camera, no story that would catch up with you. But you feel the small weight of a different ledger opening, the one that lives behind your ribs. You dial the number on the card. When a voice answers and breaks with relief, it isn't the thanks that settles you. It's the air inside your chest turning clear again. We talk about wealth as if it were a pile, numbers stacked, trophies lined up, rooms that display proof. But there is another kind of richness that doesn't collect. It coheres. Integrity is the kept shape of a life, the unbroken line that allows you to recognize yourself from the inside. It is not a performance for an audience. It is the quiet fit between what you say matters and what your hands actually do when no one is taking notes. The cost of breaking that fit is paid in currency. Most ledgers don't track. A small lie buys a minute and rents your attention for days. A flattering shortcut earns applause and invoices your sleep. The mind must keep the story patched. The body must carry the bracing. You can still function, but there is static on the line. You look in a window at night and hesitate because the face looking back is practicing an accent it didn't need before. Integrity seems expensive at first because it asks you to forgo things that sparkle now. The easy yes that sells out a boundary. The deal that needs you to call harm by another name. The rumor that would win you 5 minutes in the warm circle. But watch the arithmetic across time. What you refuse to trade becomes a foundation. The spine you keep saves you from building elaborate scaffolds to prop up the version of you the room expects. The hours reclaimed from self-justification return to craft, to love, to unguarded laughter that does not scan for microphones. This kind of wealth does not make you invulnerable. It makes you congruent. When a mistake is yours, you claim it early because you would rather be accurate than immaculate. Apology becomes maintenance, not theater. The mirror stays clean enough that you can use it to get ready, not as a surface for rehearsing a defense. The people around you learn the rhythm. If you promise, you show. If you can't, you say so without ornate reasons. Your name becomes a door that opens and closes when you say it will. That is capital you cannot counterfeit. There will be rooms where integrity shrinks your options. A softer answer would advance you. A silent witness would spare you a hard hour. It helps to remember the difference between cost and corrosion. Cost stings and passes. Corrosion keeps working in secret. When you choose the sting, you feel small for a moment and walk away lighter. When you choose the shine, you feel large for a moment and carry sand in the gears. The machine still runs, but every motion grinds. None of this requires sainthood. Integrity is not severity. It is proportion. It says, tell the truth without dropping it like a hammer. It says, keep a promise to yourself with the gentleness you extend to a friend. It says, set the boundary in a tone you won't have to atone for later. It is not rigid. It revises when new facts arrive, but it does not outsource its compass to whatever is loudest this week. There is wealth, too, in how integrity simplifies. Life has fewer secret rooms. You don't need to remember which version of yourself you issued to which audience. You stop renting other people's approval to hold your structure up. Distraction loses one of its favorite foods. You turn down opportunities that would make your mouth rich and your mind poor. The calendar begins to resemble you. You learn to be proud of what you declined. Integrity also travels outward. People breathe differently around someone who is not running a private market in impressions. The temperature of a meeting drops when a single person refuses to sell exaggeration as vision. A team steadies when someone says, "That was my miss," and doesn't attach a pair of crutches to the sentence. Children watch you return the extra change, and a small, invaluable equation forms in them about who they might be. The dividend of your choices arrives in other people's nervous systems. There is a softer test you can use when the decision is murky. Imagine telling the person you most want to respect you about the choice you're about to make, not as a confession, but as a story of your day. If the imagined conversation makes you straighten your posture, you're close. If it makes you shrink from your own voice, you already know. We often have enough light to see the next honest step. We just need to stop shading the lamp. If you have lived far from this for a while, you are not disqualified. Begin with something small and actual. Tell the truth in a low-stakes place where you usually decorate it. Keep one promise to your own morning and let the muscle remember what keeping feels like. Return one thing that isn't yours, even if it's only the argument you borrowed and don't believe. Integrity compounds through repetitions, so ordinary no one applauds them. That is why it outlasts applause. In the end, this wealth is measured in clarity. You can lie down at night without needing the dark to hide anything. You can walk into a difficult room with your shoulders level because you have not sold the part of you that would be needed there. You can hold someone's gaze not to prove you are clean, but because you are not busy editing. The river of attention flows where you want it to go. That freedom is worth more than any number printed under your name. And because this kind of wealth isn't hoarded, it spills. The way you place your words on a tired afternoon, the way you sign your name under work you actually stand behind, the way you put a quiet hand on a situation rather than a showy one, these tilt the ground around you. Someone's day takes a different turn. A door you will never walk through opens a degree wider. What your inner ledger records becomes weather beyond your own window, and the simplest act of yours becomes part of the shape another life takes next. Every action shapes another's world. A man drops his glove on the bus and doesn't notice. You tap his shoulder and point, and a small thread is rescued from unraveling. His fingers will be warm on the long walk. The phone call he makes at dusk will be gentler because he is not cold. The person on the other end will sleep a little easier. None of this looks like heroics. It looks like a fingertip, a word, a moment you could have let pass. But the world is built out of what we let pass and what we touch. We like to imagine our lives as self-contained apartments with thick walls and good locks. Then the day proves otherwise. A driver waves you in, your heart rate learns a slower rhythm. You arrive not as a fuse but as a person. Or someone sends a message sharpened by their own bad hour. For 10 minutes you believe the sharpness is truth, and your next reply carries the same voltage into a room that didn't deserve it. The myth of isolation dissolves quickly if you follow a single decision for a few more doors. Every gesture is a stone in water. Some make an obvious splash. The promotion you grant, the law you vote for, the check you write. Others are the quietest imaginable. The way you hold a gaze that could have been dismissed. The chair you return to the table so the next body isn't snagged by its leg. The sentence you choose not to post because a stranger's morning isn't yours to scorch. The rings travel outward, whether or not you stay to watch them reach ashore. This is not a demand to be solemn about breathing. It is an invitation to accurate scale. You are smaller than your fears. Tell you when they insist that everything depends on you. You are larger than your indifference would like you to believe when it whispers that nothing you do really matters. Somewhere truer than both is a fact you can feel. Your day is a lever, not for the whole planet. No, but for the 5 feet around you and the few hours you are given. The lever works. Consider how mood propagates. The sigh you think no one hears alters the room's barometer. The laugh you let be a laugh instead of a performance for your imaginary critic relaxes someone else's shoulders by an inch. There is a physics to this. The way metronomes on a shared tabletop sync. The way a flock turns as if a single thought passed through 1,000 wings. We are tuned instruments laid on the same bench. Vibration travels. Design participates in this too. You choose where a chair faces, and the conversation shifts from confrontation to companionship. You label a drawer clearly, and a future argument about where is the thing never arrives at a tired hour. You answer a child's question with real attention, and their next question grows teeth instead of shame. These are not grand solutions. They are the ground floor grammar of how a life nudges other lives toward relief or strain. Responsibility can feel heavy if it's framed as surveillance. Live perfectly because you are always under the gaze of the world. But responsibility can also be a form of freedom. You get to alter the temperature. You don't have to accept the weather you were handed at breakfast. You can be the first person in a chain to lower your voice, to verify before passing along a rumor, to leave the restroom dignified for the stranger who will arrive trembling because the day has been unkind. Small mercies aren't small to the bodies that receive them. There is also the matter of time. Some actions are seeds whose bloom you will never see. You mentor a person who disappears from your calendar and turns up years later as a steady hand in a crisis you'll hear about third hand. You give the most patient 10 minutes of your week to someone who needed exactly that once to believe in a door again. Faith is part of the craft here, believing that usefulness doesn't need to be witnessed to be real. Ethically, this view interrupts the shortcuts we take when we are hurried or bruised. It is harder to treat a cashier as a machine when you can feel the rings traveling under their skin into a night you won't see. It is harder to post the clever cruelty when you imagine it landing in a room already heavy with other people's sharp words. It is harder to excuse a lie as no big deal when you admit how much effort it costs, a mind to live in a fog it made. Precision of care isn't prissiness, it is respect for physics. None of this forbids anger. Anger that protects the vulnerable or defends a boundary is part of the weather a healthy city needs. But even anger has a choice of instruments. You can swing a sword and cut everything in reach, or you can ring a bell and gather what must change. The bell does not dull the message, it makes room for what has to happen next. If you want to test how far an action travels, try subtraction. Picture removing one kindness from your day, the door not held, the text not sent, the apology postponed. Run the film forward 3 scenes. Something small has tightened. Someone drinks their coffee faster and listens worse in a meeting where a fragile idea needed air. The world did not end. It just grew a little meaner. Add the kindness back. Now the film has room for a different ending. This is not magic. It is mechanics. You could live as if the levers were elsewhere in the headlines, in rooms you will never enter, in hands you will never shake. Some are. Many are not. Many are within reach of your next sentence, your next pause, your next decision about whether to turn your attention into a blade or a bomb. The river you step into is the one you help color with each touch. And quietly, beneath all of this, a more intimate truth keeps surfacing. If action is the current that touches other shores, attention is the spring that feeds the current. Where you place your eyes, what you allow to colonize your mind, how you curate the first minutes of your morning, these choices draft the tone for everything your hands will do. Before the ripple, there is the gaze. Before the world tilts, there is the lens. You are responsible for attention. Every morning begins with a vote. Before your feet find the floor, something asks for your eyes. A screen buzzing like a trapped insect, a window that has already drawn the day in chalk across the sky, a memory tapping your shoulder for another retelling. Whichever you choose will tint the rest of your hours. This isn't moral drama, it's physics. Attention is a lens that colors the light coming through it, and the color spills onto everything you touch. We like to think attention just happens to us, a weather system we endure. But the mind is more like a garden plot than a sky. What grows there reflects what you plant and what you permit to root. Leave the soil unattended and wind-blown seeds take over, grievances, ads, the latest fight dressed up as civic duty. Tend it, and the plot becomes selective, not in the brittle sense of avoidance, but in the generous sense of making room for what you mean to cultivate. Notice how the day bends under small choices. 5 frantic minutes of headlines can prime your body for battles you'll never enter, and you bring that readiness to a kitchen that needed only tea. 3 breaths at the window teach your chest a slower tempo, and suddenly the email reads less like a verdict and more like a puzzle. Attention sets the key for the song. The melody of your actions follows. Call this responsibility not because you are to blame for every intrusion, but because you are one of the few people authorized to set the room's lighting from the inside. The economy knows your attention is valuable. That's why so many machines are designed to harvest it. Feeds are casinos with better coffee. Notifications are little taps on the aquarium glass. The metric isn't what nourishes you, it's what keeps your gaze. This doesn't make the tools evil. It makes them indifferent. Responsibility here looks like consent, choosing when to enter the marketplace and when to keep your hours tax-free. You mute a thread that turns your pulse into a metronome. You remove the app that keeps borrowing your evening and never pays it back. You let silence be a recommendation engine of its own. What you attend to becomes part of your interior architecture. If you keep staring at outrage, the mind installs shelves for it. If you keep staring at skill, the hands start to arrange themselves around practice. If you keep staring at beauty, not the curated kind, but the humble one, like steam shouldering up from a mug, you grow less hungry for spectacle and more capable of seeing the world's ordinary kindnesses before they pass unannounced. You are what you eat was always also about eyes. This duty travels beyond private mood. Attention is contagious. Rooms synchronized to the most awake gaze in them. Look for what is working, name it plainly, and watch a group remember resources it forgot it had. Hunt only for failure, and people become proof of your thesis. The difference is not in the raw facts, it's in which facts your beam keeps warm. Responsibility is not pretending. Harm isn't present. It is refusing to make harm the sole narrator when other voices deserve a turn. There's a discipline in where you refuse to look. Starve rumors of your curiosity, and they die before dinner. Decline to replay your worst 15 minutes, and the mind stops scoring it for a full orchestra. Withhold your gaze from the performance that rewards cruelty, and the performer must either change acts or play to an emptier house. Your inattention can be as ethical as your attention. You close the curtains on the stage that steals from your capacity to be of use. But responsibility is not grim austerity. It is design. Place a book on the table instead of the phone on the bed. Put your running shoes in the doorway, where laziness has to step over them to exit. Keep a notebook at arm's length so the thought that didn't fit in the rush has somewhere to land. Create a small altar of cues, lamp, chair, pen, that tells your body this is where thinking becomes gentle. Curate the first 10 minutes of the day and the last 10 as if they were borders between countries, because they are. This care extends to people. Let someone have your undivided gaze for 60 seconds and watch their voice uncoil. Ask one more question and give it a place to land. Silence that doesn't twitch, posture that doesn't signal impatience. With children, with elders, with the person who is always fine until you ask twice, attention is a form of shelter. You can change the weather of a conversation by taking your eyes off your own forecast. And yes, your attention requires a boundary from your own mind. Worry will audition as responsible vigilance. It is usually unpaid fantasy. Nostalgia will pitch itself as gratitude. It often wants you to resign from the present. The discipline is to note the audition, thank it, and hire what is actually qualified, the next useful action, the truer sentence, the small mercy within reach. When the mind wanders, you are not bad. You are alive. Responsibility is the art of returning without scolding. If this sounds like a lot of work, consider the alternative. When you don't direct your attention, something else does. When you don't decide what matters, an algorithm with a quarterly target will suggest it. When you don't choose what to amplify, your appetite will be trained by whatever is loudest. Ownership of attention is a kind of quiet sovereignty. It's how you keep from becoming a roommate to your own life. There is a final, quieter layer beneath the mechanics. Where you place your attention reveals what you take to be worthy in the first place. To keep your eyes on dignity when it's costly suggests you believe in dignity without needing a spreadsheet to prove its ROI. To look for possibility in tired rooms suggests you believe the world is improvable and that people can surprise you for the better. These are not conclusions reason can guarantee in advance. They are stances you adopt and then test in the living. Attention, then, is not only a tool, it is a declaration about reality. And that leads us into a deeper chamber. Under every deliberate glance is a choice about what to treat as true before the evidence arrives in perfect shoes. You cannot run a life on proofs alone. You need working axioms, commitments you cannot demonstrate like a theorem, but decide to live by anyway. The shape of your days will come from them. The life that follows will show whether they were wise. Living by unprovable principles. There are nights when the city goes quiet, and the traffic lights keep working anyway. You stop at the empty intersection, not because a camera is watching, not because a car is coming, but because you have decided that stopping matters even when no one is asking you to. You could prove the convenience of rolling through. You cannot prove the worth of honoring a rule when the audience is zero. You do it because some part of you has chosen to live under a sky that holds even when the room is empty. A life won't run on proofs alone. Try it, and you end up stalled in the doorway, waiting for certainty to hand you a guarantee written in perfect ink. Evidence is wonderful. It tells you whether a bridge stood up today. But something else tells you where to build bridges in the first place. Call those unprovable principles if you like, commitments that can't be demonstrated like a theorem, yet still deserve the weight of your hours. The belief that truth is better than expedience, even when expedience looks generous. The belief that people can change, even when your ledger of experience says no. The belief that dignity is not earned by performance, but carried by being alive. You practice them in small, ordinary sights. You return a cashier's extra change because it would muddle your sleep to keep it. You tell the harder version of the story because you want to be the sort of person whose mouth doesn't need asterisks. You give a colleague credit out loud because invisibility is a theft you refuse to participate in. None of these gestures can be defended with mathematics. They are positions you adopt and keep adopting, the way a tree keeps turning its leaves toward the same light. Every craft has its axioms. Mathematics begins by agreeing to rules it doesn't prove, otherwise the game cannot open. Science assumes the world is consistent enough to study, otherwise experiments would be souvenirs instead of knowledge. Living, too, requires axioms. You choose them before the experiment. Then you test them by inhabiting them. The proof, if there is one, is the texture of your days. The air inside your chest, the absence of static when you meet your own eyes in a window at night, the steadier weather in rooms you touch. Skepticism will visit with good questions. What if your principle makes you a fool? What if kindness is exploited? Honesty punished? Patience mistaken for weakness? Sometimes it will be. The bet you place is not that the world will always reward you, but that you will remain intact even when it doesn't. A clean ledger may not buy you applause, but it buys you usable attention. It keeps you out of the side hustle of managing lies. It lets you carry fewer disguises in your bag. These commitments are not marble statues. They are living tools that should be inspected and repaired. Tell the truth does not mean weaponize it. You learn tone and timing so truth can be medicine instead of shrapnel. See the best in people does not mean ignore harm. You keep your eyes open and your boundaries working. Principles are compasses, not leashes. They point. You still have to steer around weather. There's a deeper wager under all this, that meaning outruns measurement. You will not be able to quantify the hour you sat with someone who couldn't stop shaking, or the way your restraint kept a meeting from becoming a landslide. You will not win an argument with a cynic by presenting a spreadsheet of saved bridges. What you can do is notice the climate of your own life under these choices. Does the day leak less? Do your hands become more available for work instead of for reputation maintenance? Does sleep arrive without conditions? You'll meet pressure to trade these stances for quicker currencies. The room laughs easiest when sarcasm pays. The promotion prefers the result without the method. The algorithm will not award you for not dunking on a stranger. Here the principle must answer to itself. You don't remain honest because it's a good brand. You remain honest because you like the person you are when you don't need special lighting. You don't protect the absent because it gets you invited back. You do it because it keeps the ground safer to stand on when it's your name they're holding with careless hands. Sometimes the principal will ask you to stand alone. You'll be the only one in the group who doesn't forward the rumor, the only one who admits the mistake, the only one who leaves a table that feeds on contempt. Loneliness is part of the price, but loneliness is not the same as being lost. There is a quiet company in keeping faith with something you cannot prove but have learned to trust. That decency is not a costume, that courage prefers accuracy over theater, that gentleness, disciplined and clear-eyed, can carry more weight than noise. And yes, there will be days when your choice looks foolish to people who measure differently. They will explain your motives back to you in a language that doesn't fit your mouth. They will call prudence fear, restraint weakness, mercy naivety. You could stop and litigate your inner life for them, carrying your reasons around like witness statements. Or you could let your practice be your argument. A principle does its best talking through repetition. Think of it this way. A lighthouse does not submit essays to the dark. It keeps a beam. Ships understand. Some don't. The point is not universal applause. It is reliable light. Hold to that, and the need to be perfectly explained begins to loosen its grip. A life anchored in what it has chosen, carefully, humbly, without grandstanding, can afford at last to leave some misunderstandings unsolved and keep walking toward whatever it has quietly decided to serve. Freedom from needing to be understood. You try once more to explain. You choose better words this time, slower ones, with all the edges sanded. The other person nods, but you can feel it. Their picture of you remains drawn in a different pencil. On the way home, your mind keeps staging the conversation again and again, translating your motives into a language you hope they'd finally hear. Then a stranger cuts you off. The kettle whistles, the dog wants out, and somewhere between the small interruptions you notice a quieter possibility. What if you let the misunderstanding stand, not as defeat, but as a choice? We are built to want to be seen accurately. Childhood taught us early that misreading can be dangerous, so we become quick litigators of our own intent, carrying binders of context and footnotes, ready to defend the person we meant to be. But there is a cost to running a courtroom in your head. Each new exhibit rents the rest of your attention. You start living to correct the record rather than to live the day. You work for an audience that may not even be present, rehearsing statements for a jury that changes faces hourly. Freedom from needing to be understood isn't apathy. It's a commitment to be legible to yourself first. The point is not to vanish into secrecy or to call withdrawal maturity. The point is to stop outsourcing your piece to other people's interpretations. You can offer clarity. You cannot guarantee reception. You can make your words true. You cannot make them land where they do not fit. Part of the relief comes from recognizing the mechanics. No one sees anyone cleanly. We meet one another through fogged glass, histories, fears, desires. A dozen private weather systems blur the view. Your sentence arrives in a room already furnished with other people's sentences that sounded like yours but weren't. Even your best honesty is compressed by time, tone, and the limits of language. How could a life as dense as yours be fully recovered in someone else's head? The impossibility is not failure. It is physics. There is also the matter of allegiance. If your integrity is anchored, as you've chosen, then your practice becomes your argument. You don't need to footnote your kindness with a manifesto. You let its repetition make your case. You don't need to publish a transcript of every boundary. You set it in a voice you can live with and let the day proceed. You don't need to file an appeal every time your motives are misnamed. You continue to move like the person you claim to be, and that movement, repeated, teaches more than any paragraph could. This does not mean silence in places where accuracy guards safety. Contracts need clarity. Medicine needs specifics. If a misunderstanding risks harm, you correct it. Freedom here is not recklessness. It's proportion. You stop performing legal defense in arenas that can't deliver justice. Comment sections, childhood echo chambers, the imaginary panel in your head that exists only to keep you busy. You spend that attention on building the life whose texture you can actually feel. There is a tenderness to reclaiming your privacy. You can let some parts of yourself be unshared without making them a secret. You can hold a grief without requesting universal approval for its size. You can do good work without narrating its purity, in case someone suspects you of angles. You can inhabit your change without filing a public amendment to old expectations. You practice telling the truth to the people who can use it and letting the rest be background noise. Your nervous system does not have to metabolize. Relationships often breathe better under this posture. When you stop demanding to be perfectly mirrored, you leave other people room to be other people. You listen without loading your reply with preemptive corrections. You apologize faster because your self-worth is no longer hanging from their exact interpretation of your apology. You stop making intimacy a condition of flawless translation and start making it a practice of steady goodwill in the presence of inevitable error. Your body knows the difference. The jaw unclenches when you decline an argument that would feed no one. The shoulder lowers when you choose not to compose the clarifying message that would only invite a sequel. Sleep returns when you retire from managing rumors about yourself in rooms you do not enter. The nervous system learns that not every misreading is a fire. Some are weather. You can let them pass with the same patience you bring to rain. There will be losses. Some stories about you will calcify in places you can't reach. Some people will insist on a smaller version of you because it keeps their own world simpler. Let it be. Your hours are finite and better spent on craft, on care, on building the kind of presence that leaves rooms more habitable than you found them. Paradoxically, when you stop straining to be understood, you often are, because your attention returns to the simple consistency that makes a life legible without PR. Try a small exercise. When a misunderstanding stings, ask a question that reorients the scene. What would a person with nothing to prove do next? Maybe you send one clean sentence and then stop. Maybe you say, "Thank you for telling me how that landed," and repair what is yours to repair, but not the entire coastline of someone else's weather. Maybe you do nothing, because sometimes the world needs a little time without your hands on it to correct its own angle. Notice how this shifts the center of gravity. You are no longer chasing every mirror in town to check your reflection. You return to the quiet workshop where your actions are made. You keep your promises, including the uncomfortable ones. You guard your tone so that future you doesn't have to clean up after the way you said the right thing. You let your pace be set by the work rather than by the air horn of reputation. Little by little, the life itself starts carrying the weight you once tried to load onto explanation. And from here, another question comes into view, less about how you are read and more about who is doing the living. If you stop spending your attention polishing the portrait, what kind of person can you actually be in the room? Not a performance designed to win perfect comprehension, but a presence that would make sense to you, even if no one ever wrote you a generous caption. That's the invitation waiting beyond the need to be understood, to become, not explain, to embody the qualities you seek in others, and to let that embodiment do the only convincing that matters. Become the person you'd want to meet. A slow line coils around the bakery case, sugar in the air, a bell that rings every time the door finds more weather. A child drops a coin, and it skitters under someone's boot. Before the parent can apologize, the person in front of you kneels, fishes it out, and returns it with a small smile that doesn't ask for a receipt. No speech, no performance. The gesture lands, and the room's temperature lowers by a degree you can feel on your forearms. You think briefly that if more days contained people like this, the world would be gentler to stand in. Then the thought tips, what if that person was you? The mind likes big vows. It imagines a version of yourself who always has the right words, who rescues conversations with the grace of a practiced cellist. But the people you remember fondly were rarely grand. They were accurate. The friend who asked one more question and made your story longer than your shame. The nurse whose tone told your fear it did not need to perform. The teacher who admitted ignorance without losing authority. What you wanted from them was not spectacle. It was steadiness, curiosity, proportion. You can become a place where those things occur. This isn't self-reinvention by decree. It's carpentry. You study a trait you crave in others and build a small, usable version of it into your day. You wish people didn't rush to defend themselves? Try letting one accusation pass through you without an immediate counterargument. You wish rooms felt less transactional? Offer attention with no purchase order attached. You wish someone would meet their own limits without making them your fault? Practice naming yours in a tone that keeps the bridge standing. There's nothing mystical here, only the physics of practice and the way repetition becomes weather. Character is contagious. That's why we ache after chance encounters with people who carry their hours well. Something in our own posture changes for a while. Becoming the person you'd want to meet means recognizing that you too are a climate system. The way you enter a room, the pace, the eyes, the willingness to let silence have a chair, all of it teaches the bodies nearby how to be present. You can't control whether they learn the lesson, but you can keep offering a stable barometer. Of course, the phrase can turn sour if you mistake it for performance. You are not auditioning to be beloved by an imaginary audience with perfect taste. You're building a self you respect enough to keep company with when the house is quiet. That often looks smaller than the ego prefers. Wiping a counter you didn't dirty, returning the cart, sending the message that says, "I was unfair," lowering your voice first. These are not branding opportunities. They are the unglamorous scaffolds that hold a life you don't need to escape. The person you'd want to meet has boundaries. They can say no without vandalizing the connection. They forgive without pretending it didn't matter. They decline the conspiracy of contempt, even when everyone's eyes sparkle with it. Becoming that person means you stop equating kindness with compliance. You learn the weight of your yes by protecting the clarity of your no. You leave parties early, not as a protest, but as a promise to tomorrow's attention. You don't do everything. You do the right things long enough for trust to grow moss on them. There's also humor. Not the kind that wins the room by splitting someone's back with a clever line, but the gentler variety that lets air into a tight moment. You can be the person who laughs first at their own clumsiness and thereby rescues everyone else from pretending perfection is the ticket price. You can be the one who shrugs, "That was mine," and frees a meeting from a half hour of polite disguises. The person you'd want to meet admits to being human, which gives everyone present permission to stop acting. If you need a template, borrow from the way you hope a stranger would treat your future self on a difficult day. Let that imagined care set your posture before you know whether the person across from you deserves it. Not because you're naive, but because you want your habits to be deliberate even when your information is partial. You can always narrow warmth if the facts require it. It is harder to reverse the harm of starting with suspicion you later discover wasn't earned. None of this asks you to be endless. The person you'd want to meet is allowed to be tired, to say, "I need 5 minutes," to need mercy. Becoming them includes learning to ask for the very qualities you're practicing. You show your seams, and you still belong. You cry, you apologize, you cancel kindly when you misjudged your capacity. You don't hold others to a standard that forbids the very vulnerability that made you want to meet them in the first place. What do you do with the days when you fail your own hope? You keep the workshop open, you sweep the floor, you sand the edge. You speak to yourself the way you'd want a decent stranger to speak to you on a stairwell. Careful there. Start again. The person you'd want to meet would not applaud your self-contempt. They would offer proportion and send you back into the day with a tool you can lift. Be that voice. It's not indulgence, it's maintenance. The strangest part is how much relief this brings. When you aim to become rather than impress, explanation loosens its grip. You do not spend the evening polishing a transcript for a court that will never sit. You go to bed tired in the clean way, the way that comes from lifting what was yours, setting down what wasn't, and leaving a room more habitable than you found it. You wake to the same work and are not disgusted by the repetition. It feels like tending a fire that warms more than just your hands. And because you've chosen a way of being rather than a pose, you can afford to tell the truth when you don't know what comes next. The person you'd want to meet doesn't confuse certainty with competence. They can say, "I'm not sure," and still carry you through the hallway, which is fortunate because the next turn on this road will ask for exactly that, a willingness to stand where the map fades, to feel the odd calm that arrives when you stop forcing answers to appear on demand, and to find in that not knowing a kind of shelter you didn't expect to trust. The strange comfort of uncertainty. A message lands with that careful phrase people use when answers aren't ready. We'll know more on Monday. Until then, the weekend stretches like a fogged coastline. Plans soften. The mind wants to sprint ahead, to demand a verdict, to turn the future into something you can grip. But there's nothing to grab. Only a waiting room in time with chairs you can't rearrange. At first, uncertainty feels like inactivity, a pause that steals motion. Then, if you stay long enough, something surprising appears around the edges. Space. We are built to crave conclusions. The brain loves closed doors. It calls them safety. That's why rumor thrives, why forecasts soothe even when they're wrong, why a bad explanation can feel better than an honest "I don't know." Certainty offers the clean relief of a period. Uncertainty hands you a comma and asks you to keep reading. No wonder we tighten. We mistake the open sentence for danger. But look closer. The world itself runs on provisional truths, weather that changes its mind mid-afternoon, tides that consent to come and go, seedlings that choose a direction only after finding the light. Science moves not by victory laps, but by questions that stay standing long enough to teach us how to ask better ones. Art lives in the unresolved chord. Love grows in the time it takes to learn another person's particular weather. Uncertainty isn't the enemy of meaning, it's the room where meaning is negotiated. If you let it, not knowing becomes a kind of honesty that relaxes the jaw. "I don't know yet" stops pretending to be a flaw and begins to sound like air. It protects you from premature closure. The habit of slapping a label on a living thing so you can stop paying attention. With uncertainty, attention stays awake. You notice details a conclusion would have dismissed, the way someone's voice wavers when they say they're fine, the option hidden behind the obvious plan, the door that wasn't on the blueprint but is now unmistakably in the wall. There is comfort here, though it wears plain clothes. Uncertainty relieves you from the performance of omniscience. You don't have to bully the room into choosing your favorite projection just so you can rest. You can rest anyway. You begin to build a life that can breathe inside for now. Decisions shrink to the size of the day. What is the next true step, the reversible move, the good faith experiment? You edit out the drama of forever and replace it with the craft of today. Even conflict softens under this signal. "I could be wrong" makes a conversation wider without making you smaller. Curiosity replaces prosecution. You ask questions that are not cross-examinations. You practice describing instead of diagnosing. Sentences lose their weapons. Always, never, obviously. In their place, you use words like "seems," "currently," "from my side of the street." People breathe. Solutions become visible because no one is busy defending a castle that doesn't exist. Uncertainty is also merciful with the self. You stop carving predictions into your own skin. You trade prophecies like "I'll always be like this" for "I haven't learned how yet." That single word "yet" adds a window to a wall. It invites you to keep a beginner's bench in your house, a place where clumsiness isn't a verdict but a rite of passage. Pride protests. Then it remembers that mastery began as tolerated incompetence. Of course, uncertainty has teeth. Waiting can bruise. The unknown can keep a nervous system on high alert, mistaking ambiguity for danger. Comfort doesn't arrive by denying that truth. It arrives when you learn to build handles inside the fog, routines that keep your hours legible, small anchors you can hold without collapsing into control. A walk at the same time each day, a sentence you trust when panic makes a case for certainty at any price, a rule like send one clear email and stop. You install rails in the hallway without pretending you can redesign the weather. There is even a specific joy that uncertainty preserves, wonder. When outcomes aren't fixed, surprise stays possible, the good kind as well as the hard. You stop scripting conversations in your head and watch what actually happens in the room. A stranger becomes a person, a morning becomes a landscape rather than a link between obligations. The world goes back to being slightly larger than your opinion of it, which turns out to be a relief. If you want to practice, try this. When your mind reaches for prediction, offer it attention instead. Notice 5 present things with the care you usually reserve for the forecast. Light on the table, the angle of a shoulder, the smell of something warming in the kitchen. The nervous system, given a task it can complete now, lowers its weapon. In that pause, wisdom has a chance to speak in a smaller voice than panic uses. And when the outcome finally arrives, good, bad, or mixed, you meet it with less whiplash because you didn't spend your waiting rehearsing only one version of the scene. You left room for reality to be particular. That room is what makes resilience more than a slogan. It's how people bend without breaking, how communities adapt without losing their spine, how a single life remains usable even when the map changes during the walk. Here is the strangest comfort of all. Uncertainty is democratic. It spares no one. Behind every window, someone is holding a question they cannot force into an answer. The person who looks so composed at the crosswalk. The nurse with the steady hands. The friend who jokes easily. Everyone is carrying a Monday that hasn't spoken yet. Knowing this doesn't solve the unknown. It surrounds it with company. You can be kinder because you are not the only one suspended between chapters. And in that shared suspension, something steady begins to form, not certainty, but solidarity, a willingness to stand next to one another without rushing the ending. A glance that says, "I'm also waiting," which is its own kind of warmth. From the fog, you can see the outline of what holds when answers don't. The way we pass cups, trade maps, lend shoulders, remember names. The comfort of uncertainty, it turns out, becomes most visible in the simple ways we keep each other from feeling alone inside it. The quiet power of shared humanity. A train stalls between stations, lights dimmed to a soft dusk. The air grows warm, conversations thin to whispers. Somewhere in the middle car, a child begins to cry, sharp at first, then small and hiccuping. A woman takes a paper fan from her bag and waves a slow breeze toward the stroller. The teenager across the aisle offers his water. A man in a suit kneels, not to advise, but to roll a toy back and forth along the floor, so the child has something to chase with their eyes. No one makes a speech. No one asks what anyone believes or how they vote. For a few minutes, the car becomes a room where strangers share a task. Keep a single small person from feeling alone. Moments like this don't trend. They leave no headline. Yet they're the scaffolding of most days. The way we pass doors, hold elevators, steady cups, translate confusion at the pharmacy counter into a plan a tired body can follow. You can feel how a city breathes better when these minor mercies circulate. They don't fix everything. They make everything more bearable, and sometimes that is the thing that needs doing most. Shared humanity is not a slogan. It's a practice of recognition. It starts with the plainest sentence a person can think. You exist as deeply as I do, not as an idea, not as a role, but as a whole interior with weather I cannot see. From that recognition, small instructions arrive. Speak in a way that doesn't spend someone else's energy by making them decode your contempt. Design the meeting as if someone there is grieving. Write the directions as if the reader is afraid of asking twice. Assume fatigue and make room, not because people are fragile, but because people are people. We are taught to rank, to sort the world into us and not us, so we can move faster. It works for logistics. It starves the soul. When you actually look, the lines blur. A face you once filed under difficult is carrying a parent's diagnosis. The efficient colleague has a calendar arranged like a maze around a child's sleep. Even the person who harmed you without excusing a thing was operating out of a map where fear kept mistaking itself for survival. This doesn't erase accountability. It gives it a scale that fits human hands. You can seek repair without needing to erase the complicated person who stands in front of you. Shared humanity also asks you to let yourself be ordinary, not unworthy ordinary, able to need help, to bore someone with a story, to be corrected without collapsing. You stop trying to graduate from vulnerability and discover that the membership fee for belonging is simply to admit you're made of the same breakable materials as everyone else. The relief is real. When you're not busy posing as invulnerable, you have bandwidth for gentleness. And gentleness, multiplied by proximity, becomes infrastructure. Think of the quiet technologies that carry this forward. A pot of soup delivered without hovering. A message that says no need to respond and means it. A chair pulled slightly away from the wall so a cane can find it. A classroom rule that dignifies wrong answers as steps. A workplace habit of saying people's names before their idea so they know they were seen. None of these require charisma. They require attention disciplined by care. The paradox is that shared humanity grows strongest, not in agreement, but in uncertainty. The more you admit you don't have the full map, the more space you have to meet other travelers. Curiosity replaces prosecution. You ask, what's the part of this I can't see? And wait long enough for an answer that doesn't flatter you. Conflict doesn't vanish. It becomes navigable. You can hold a principle and a person at the same time without tearing the room. There is courage here too, the courage to interrupt contempt when it starts to braid itself into the group, to leave a conversation that makes a sport of someone absent, to say that story isn't kind in a tone that refuses both theater and surrender, the courage to apologize with your back straight, the courage to forgive without pretending your boundary isn't real. Shared humanity is not softness that melts under heat. It is softness that survives heat and keeps its shape. It helps to remember how often you've been carried by people you couldn't name now if you tried. The driver who waited an extra beat so you could cross, the receptionist who bent a rule just enough to save your morning, the stranger who looked at you the exact moment you needed to be looked at and gave you back to yourself. If that is true, and it is, then the arithmetic is simple. Your turn comes daily. You may never learn what your turn accomplished. Offer it anyway. If there is a prayer that requires no belief to work, it may be this: let me treat whoever is in front of me as if the next hour of their life matters. The language can be secular. The effect is sacramental. Rooms change under its light. Meetings end with more oxygen than they began. Children remember the shape of your voice when they think about what safety sounds like. Even your own mind steadies, because it is difficult to be both cruel and accurate about another person's reality at the same time. We'll be forgotten, most of us, and sooner than feels fair. What endures is rarely our opinions. It's the conditions we help create while we are near. Less fear in this corner, more room at that table, a path left a little clearer for the person who doesn't know yet that they'll need it. Shared humanity is not a destination. It's the way we walk, the way we carry one another across the unremarkable distances of an ordinary day, until the day is not ordinary anymore, because we didn't have to make the trip alone. If any idea from these hours left a small warmth in your hands, let it ride with you into tomorrow. No urgency, no vows, just a quieter way of seeing the same streets, the same faces, the same hour that waits by your door. We won't remember every sentence. That's fine. What matters is the weather you carry out of here, a slower breath, a gentler question, a little more room for other people's skies. The rest can fade and still have done its work. When you need it, this place will still be here. Pages you can reopen, a light you can borrow. Until then, be kind to your minutes. Treat whatever and whoever is in front of you as if the next hour of their life matters. It will change more than you think. Good night, and thank you for walking this distance together.